Faites appel, s'il vous plaît, monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelard.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern. Madame le député Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé. Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député de Hegera.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ayer. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves. Madame le député Gardner. Monsieur le député Gorst. Monsieur le député Farnham. Madame le député Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Joseph. Monsieur le député Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles.
Présent.
Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député Ward. Madame le député Miles. Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le député Miller. Madame le député Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le député Ward.
Présente.
Madame le député Wilson. Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute leur délibération est en compagnie de ta bénédiction. Réussis au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plut de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ayer. Madame le député Alves.
Défaut.
Madame le député Gardner. Monsieur le député Gorst.
Défaut.
Monsieur le député Farnham.
Défaut.
Monsieur le député Joseph. Man under Deputy Miller.
Therefore,
Man under Deputy Wilson.
If I may, sir, Deputy Wilson is still currently in Liverpool, attending to her mother, who was rushed to hospital yesterday, and wishes to be excused. Thank you.
therefore excusez? Yes. Therefore excusez. Les États sont constitués. Very well. We now continue with the debate on the main proposition, not clearly as amended, P36. And does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Hart.
Thank you, sir. I rise to support Deputy Balash's proposition to request the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs, subject to the existing safeguards to protect the integrity of the common travel area, to maintain the scheme whereby French visitors can use a valid French identity card to travel to Jersey. I congratulated, sir, the previous Minister of Justice and Home Affairs when this scheme was introduced. Figures show a rise of French visitors arriving in Jersey on Condor or Manche Isle Express from 14,915 in 2022 to 42,100 in 2024. This in no mean part to this scheme. It is good to encourage French visitors, sir. Good to see school trips here once again, frequenting St Helier. I did speak to officials whilst I was on our last French twinning trip to Agon-Coutonville in 2023. It would be great to be able to speak of the continuation of this scheme when I meet with them again in 9 days' time. Of course, many of us would like a 72-hour pass compared to the one for a few hours. But let us maintain the current scheme and then see how we can go further safely. And now, sir, I urge you to support Deputy Balash's proposition. Thank you.
Deputy Hegarty.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to accept this proposition on behalf of the Council of Ministers. I hope members will have had the opportunity to review the comments that were presented last week, setting out some of the considerations as part of this. I'm grateful to Deputy Balash for his constructive engagement with me and the Customs and Immigration Service in bringing this proposition. The question of whether the French ID card scheme could continue has been outstanding for some time. I think it would be very positive if we were able to resolve that uncertainty in favour of its continuance today. Whilst the scheme has certainly been very successful to date, and there was no particular desire to cease its operation, the uncertainty arose from concerns about its compatibility with the electronic travel authorisation system once implemented. ETA represents a significant enhancement to our border security and will provide advance permission to travel into the UK and Crown dependencies for those who do not require a visa. It has already been rolled out for the travel into the UK, and I will be bringing legislation to the Assembly later this year to provide the implementation to Jersey, which is now expected early next year. It is important for members to recognise that these are two separate, except linked, issues. Having carefully considered the options in relation to the ID card scheme post-ETA implementation, I'm pleased that we have found a way to continue this offering for French day trips by adding an exception to ETA requirements into the Jersey immigration rules. This approach effectively decouples the French ID scheme from the implementation of ETA. In my comments regarding this proposition, I've set out some of the risks we take in this approach, but these are no greater than those that relate to the operation of the scheme as it is now. I'm confident that we continue to satisfactorily mitigate these risks by applying rigorous requirements to the operation of the scheme, relying on the diligence of our highly trained immigration officers and with the continued cooperation of carriers who have been excellent partners to date. I include these risks to outline for members why I would take an exceedingly cautious approach to suggest any further expansion of the scheme beyond its current the current scheme as it is. There is a balance to be struck between the security of the border and the economic and cultural prosperity of the island, and I feel that the scheme as it stands achieves this balance. I'm grateful to JASIS officers who have taken a creative and flexible approach to working through this issue, and to my ministerial colleagues for their patience whilst we have done so. This has been ongoing, sir, for the last 18 months, and things have changed, and I'm pleased that we are in a position now to be able to accept this. I therefore will urge members to accept this proposition so we can continue the scheme and continue to have our neighbours come for their one-day trips. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Conitava of Grooville.
Thank you, sir. And as promised, I wanted to report back after our meeting last night, held in Grooville Parish Hall, with the Jumelage Games organisation. Thank you for Deputy Morel for coming along to support St Lawrence. But, sir, I asked the question of the private individuals involved in the Jersey side of that operation, and they stated quite clearly that many of our visitors from our twinning organisations in Normandy come here on the carte d'identité. And that means that if this scheme was not in place, that we would put most of the twinning organisations at risk. They are already going through, and I'm sure I won't speak out of turn here, they're going through a recruiting crisis. We were twinned with our organisation in Portby in 1991, and many of the individuals involved are now getting into their more mature years, shall I say, sir. And so if this carries on, we, again, it seems that we may be losing those organisations altogether. So we must in every way continue to encourage our visitors from Normandy, our les cousins in our organisations. So I beg everyone in the chamber to support this proposition because we cannot afford to lose our twinning organisations. So thank you.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Joseph.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je prends la parole pour soutenir la proposition de Monsieur le député Balache, même si le fait que je puis me permettre avec un cœur lourd. Car le soutien qu'il est juste que nous continuons à autoriser nos voisins français les plus proches de se rendre à Jersey avec une carte d'identité française valide. Mais je prends également la parole avec un sens de profond qui m'échappe. Le sentiment, l'occasion marquée de franchir une étape significante a été bien gérée, mais a été un message. Je voudrais envoyer un message à nos compatriotes en français que je suis désolé que l'Assemblée ne peut pas. I will continue in the English language. So I wanted to send a message to those French individuals, and I know that members would not care what I said, whether it be in the English or French language, that I will be supporting Deputy Balash's proposition, but I did so with a heavy heart. The extension has been debated. It is a request to the Minister. The principle remains the same. I believe that we should welcome French ID card holders for all of the reasons that the Constable of Greville, sir, has expressed. There are many, for more than 50% of French nationals who do not have a passport and who come from all over France to visit the areas of Normandy and Brittany and think, Jersey, that wonderful place, Victor Hugo in Guernsey. We need to do more about Victor Hugo in Jersey, which I believe we can. Deputy Balash, I congratulate him. He said some polite remarks in his opening statement that he wished he thought of my idea, but it was rejected. But I'm resolute and proper and determined. I believe that a confident, forward-facing government should continue to introduce measures that are proper, administratively practical, and are common sense and are tailored to Jersey. This narrow form of Deputy Balash's proposition, restricted to day trips only, although I think there's been some uncertainty of the overnight stay, I would encourage, if I may, the Home Affairs Minister to really consider whether or not the day trip can be extended to 24 hours. I think that any member would consider that would be, it is within the Minister's gift, subject to discussions at the Council of Ministers, including the External Relations Minister. I think it is right, as the Deputy previously said, to remind ourselves that prior to Brexit, we had thousands of French nationals, thousands of EU nationals coming without passports, but with IDs, and being able to visit Jersey. I would remind members that in 2019, we had 70,000 French visitors arriving in Jersey. It's been recovered somewhat by the scheme. That was difficult to implement. There were doubts at the time. I know, I was there. Now, those situations with French and indeed other European individuals not having passports is going to be a continuation. There's a continuation in a changing world with the ETA. And for them, I regret those other not French nationals that have valid ID cards with all the biometrics and everything that's on there, they will not be able to have a spontaneous visit to Jersey because we don't allow it, because we say it's not possible. I think that the 2023 day tripper numbers that rose to over 31,000 and in 2024 over 42,000 arrived are brilliant. They represent meals in our restaurants, bookings to attractions, and visits to our shops. Visit Jersey does excellent work. I've estimated that a typical French day trip visitor spends approximately £107. I'm sure it's more, but they, of course, if they had the overnight stay, they'd double that figure. One night in Jersey, a dinner, heritage site visit, a gallery tour, could bring up to £200 per visitor. And if we multiply that by the numbers of potential people, it's absolutely millions of pounds to our much needed visitor economy. I believe that we must speak to our own competence as an island. Our Customs and Immigration Service are brilliant. They're more than capable of continuing to administer this scheme. Manifest checks, real-time passenger tracking, immediate alerts for no-shows using AI. In this AI automation, we can do even more, better and cheaper and more safely. Jersey, so, is not that porous border that we see spoken about in the United Kingdom. A passenger who fails to return, as the Minister has absolutely said and her predecessor, is quickly identified. The few that have been found have been returned to the harbour. The system works, and it can continue to work. And the integrity of the common travel area was not compromised, and the Home Office in London informed of what Jersey was doing properly and legitimately, raised no objections, certainly in my time. I believe, sir, we need to support this proposition and not fear shadows where there are none. Instead, show an increasing confidence about what we can do and our abilities to welcome and manage as visitors to our important visitor economy. Unafraid to imagine a future where not only French visitors but other EU citizens with valid ID cards, with biometrics, may one day come to Jersey for short stays. If we can do this for France, I believe that we can do it for other EU citizens. I'd close by invoking perhaps a voice who should be better known in Jersey, of his stay here, Victor Hugo. Jersey est un morceau de France tombé dans la mer et ramassé par l'Angleterre. Jersey is a piece of England that fell into the sea and was picked up by England. It's a poetic observation and a reminder that we are both British and Norman, a bridge between those two worlds, both physically, culturally, and for all other reasons. And I believe that what is increasingly a bureaucracy, not imposed by us, but we can deal with it, has hardened that bridge into a wall. And I wish to commend Deputy Balash and the Minister for her acceptance now of this scheme. A modest day trip scheme can be administered with dignity, pride and certainty and safety. I support Deputy Balash's proposition, not because it is all I've wanted, but because it is better than nothing. And I hope, sir, and I trust in this Assembly, have always trusted in this Assembly, that we will not rest until we can make further steps going forward following the overwhelming support of this proposition brought by Deputy Balash that ought not to have been necessary, but maybe it was, and that we can one day look forward to a resurgence of other French nationals for an overnight stay and other EU citizens. Monsieur le Président, merci.
So may I raise the depot on Deputy Farnham and Deputy Gorst, please?
Yes, the depot is raised on Deputies Farnham and Gorst. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Was this proposition necessary? I think that's quite an interesting point, actually, because I know from my own experience that the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development has been pressing quite hard for these measures, but that's perhaps something for him to address. The value of the twinning associations and the support of them, I totally appreciate, and I do participate in the twinning association activities of my own constituency. What the actual visitor spend is quite interesting. I don't know that we actually have the statistics. Maybe, again, the Minister can respond. But when I have looked at the statistics in terms of visitor spend, I note that the figures I have suggest that the UK visitors accounted for 71% of all visitors, contributing a total on-island expenditure of 234 million in 2023. And in comparison, France, 14% of visitors spending 17 million. Other Channel Islands, 9 million, 6% of visitors. Germany, 2%. So I think it's quite clear where most of the money does come from. The concern that there aren't other visitors travelling and visiting us, I do think that the position about passports is in terms of the visitors who actually come to the island and spend, most of them probably would have passports, whether they're from Germany, Spain, wherever, I believe. I think there's a lot more to be understood in terms of the statistics. In the meantime, I think that we should actually have faith in the minister who's been in the front line and the former minister who's been in the front line of negotiating with the authorities in terms of what is acceptable and achievable in terms of security. Yes, maybe it can be built on in the future, and I therefore do very much encourage members to support the proposition too.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Tallier.
Thank you, sir. I want to break my speech down into three real parts. The first one is to take up the challenge of what was said in yesterday's debate about the fact that we have to look at this from the UK's perspective. So I want to start with the point that this situation we find ourselves in today, where we're not allowing overnight stays, and we've rejected 72-hour, but we're allowing day trippers to come from France, but only if they come on certain vessels. I think it's probably one of those that falls into the category of being reasonable but not rational, because there's no rational reason that we would restrict the time that visitors can come to just less than 24 hours. It has to be the same day. And it's also not rational, I don't think, that we would restrict it just to French people. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because as I said yesterday, that there will be lots of non-French EU nationals milling around Saint-Malo, possibly Granville, who would love to come to Jersey for a day, and they're not allowed to. So the question I will be coming back to later on is, what's the end game here, Minister, in terms of Jersey's offering to the European community and what it would be willing to claim in terms of our rights from the UK. So I think that's the starting point, and I'll put that question now to the Minister actually and ask. I know she's already spoken, and it's not for her to sum up, but maybe she can give it some consideration, and perhaps Deputy Balash can speak, or another minister can speak. I mean, I'm sure the Economic Development Minister may have something to say on that issue. Is it not discriminatory that Jersey is somehow giving a preference to French day trippers when there may well be German day trippers who potentially have a bigger spend? I know historically French visitors to Jersey don't always spend the most compared to some other nationals, certainly to UK visitors. I'm not sure what the latest stats are on that, but it seems to me it's both discriminatory and undesirable that we should exclude in the longer term Germans, Italians, Spanish, Austrians, the list goes on, who might wish to come to Jersey for a day trip. So what's the end game there? Perhaps Deputy Balash can give some of his vision to that. Looking at it from the UK's perspective, they might think, well, you know, we know that the 24-hour scheme, the less than 24-hour scheme is secure at the moment, but we don't know what changes are going to happen in the future. We know that Jersey's coming up to an election. We don't know what the future minister's going to think. We don't know if the current or future government has plans to cut the budgets for spending generally, or if the budget for immigration and customs will be cut also. So there are lots of question marks, I think, about even the day trip scheme. And certainly if I was one of the more hard-nosed or hard-line UK ministers or an opposition minister in the UK, I might be thinking of Jersey already by having this day trip scheme as a soft touch. I don't think they allow day trips with an ID card to any other part of the British Isles. I might be wrong, of course. No, they do to Southern Ireland, but that's part of the EU. So I'll be interested to hear from any of the ministers about that point. But I do want to finish perhaps on more of a positive note. The Constable of Grouville quite rightly said that the twinning associations generally do see the value of French visitors being able to travel over on an ID card. It's a shame he hadn't spoken to them before yesterday's debate, because I think he would have got a strong, resounding message of support asking him to vote in favour of Deputy Joseph's amendment. But hey, we're done with that. I don't want to reopen that debate. But I think there is a desire, certainly from the twinning associations, but also the businesses in the visitor economy in Jersey more widely, that they would like to see European visitors be able to stay longer just on an ID card. But maybe we have to change the narrative, because I think, and this is where I perhaps put a challenge out to the Minister for Economic Development, his team, the Assistant Minister, but also to Visit Jersey, is that maybe we need to have a refreshed campaign specifically targeting French nationals, saying to them things like, in French, I'll say it in English, come to Jersey, it's better for more than one day. And I think the campaign could easily be Jersey, ça vaut le passeport, or Jersey, ça vaut l'effort. So this idea that it's worth coming to Jersey for more than one day, and it's worth getting a passport to come to Jersey, because this is what you'll get in return from it. You'll get all this cultural richness, this heritage, you'll get this massive welcome, which will be different and hopefully better than if you were simply going to a different part of Great Britain. And I remember that old slogan that the Jersey Tourist Board used to use, something like Jersey, it's closer to home, it's a little bit of France, but it's closer to home, or not quite British, not quite French. That kind of idea, I think, needs to be recaptured. So a marketing campaign in mainland France, because we know that there were lots of adverts in the UK, I think that's quite right, but perhaps to push the budget for marketing in France, definitely in the regions of Brittany, Normandy, Paris, now that we've got the flights from Paris, and I'm sure that some of this has already been done, but to think about what works for the French psyche and not simply applying a UK or Jersey mentality to what we think might work, but what would work for the French to visit Jersey. And perhaps even be more bold than that. You know, the previous government, albeit during COVID, gave, I think it was it £100, £300? I can't remember the exact amount, to everyone in Jersey during COVID. What if we simply said to the French, if you book to come to Jersey for a week and you need to get a passport to do that, we'll refund the cost of your passport? Because I think the message at some point needs to get out to French people that it's worth having a passport anyway, because it means you can travel outside the EU. So yes, you can come to Jersey, you can visit the UK, but you can also visit places like Brazil, Japan, wherever, Canada with a passport, and you'll need a passport to travel. And I think this is where it comes back to the expectations of why this has been such an interesting debate, and why Jersey, I think, has to a certain extent been ambitious, but I think ultimately that further ambition is that we have to understand the French mentality. They talk about the mainland France as l'hexagone, because it looks like a hexagon. And what they often mean by that is that the hexagon of France is so diverse and so varied. And even in Granville, I remember speaking to one of their members of the Twinning Petanque, that they said, often French people don't need to travel outside of France because it's got everything. We can go skiing down in the south, we can go to the beaches in the Mediterranean, we could go surfing in the Atlantic, and we can visit the interior. It's got everything we need. And of course, on top of that, they've got the European Union. So that's the whole point about if even a French person who does like to travel can still travel extensively with their ID card throughout 20 or so odd countries. And okay, they'll be able to do that as long as they want. They can come to Jersey if we pass this today, and continue to come to Jersey for one day. And that's where my final question really is to ministers more generally. What's the end game here? Is this only going to be restricted to French nationals? Why? If so, how can we justify that as discriminatory ultimately? Is this going to be extended? What's the next step? Are we going to ask for it to be extended for one night? What's the time delay? How long do we have to wait for this current scheme to be put in place? What are the key performance indicators that are going to be put in there to show not just the UK, but to show ourselves that the scheme is working, and to make the case for extending it to 1 to 2 to perhaps a week? But in the meantime, I hope ministers will take that idea away, speak to Visit Jersey, and say, what are the schemes that we can put in place to actually reward French people who are willing to get a passport to visit Jersey? Will we keep our side of the bargain to make sure that when they get here, that they're welcomed, and perhaps they have that scheme to reimburse them for the cost of their passport within reasonable numbers. So thank you.
Very much. Connie Tyberson-Brillard.
Thank you, sir. Whilst I endorse what has been said by previous speakers wholeheartedly, there are a couple of points I'd like to just put into the mix as being important in the deliberation of this proposition. One is the travel link, and particularly Marchiel, which the ferry service which runs from here to Granville and the adjacent Normandy coast. It's fairly tenuous. So we put money into it, but in conversation with representatives from Granville who attended here as part of our Twinning Association collaborations last week, the feeling was that if we didn't have the identity cards, which we've close to achieving, that puts that link at peril. And it's already difficult for the French to justify supporting it if it doesn't get the passengers. So by virtue of the fact that we are encouraging passengers to, or French passengers to come here with these cards, I think is terribly important. If that could be increased to a longer stay, that would be even more valuable, I think, to that link, which I feel should be retained at all costs, all reasonable costs. The second point that came to me during the course of last week, I tend to sort of hold my parish surgery in my premises at St Albans, and we had a visit from a party of French school children, probably about 15, 20 of them, all made their little purchases, might have been £5 or so, and not in the grand scheme of things, I'm sure, not important, but I always believe that if you look after the pennies, the pounds take care of themselves. And I felt so that those children will be the future visitors to the island. Are we making it easy for them to come to Jersey? Are they able to do exchange visits with Jersey schools? And I think that they are unlikely to have passports, so will be, I suspect, entirely coming on the basis of the travel permits. And that's an area I think we need to do more exploration on, and maybe that's for the Education Minister to consider. The other point that was made is that passports for the French are not perhaps quite so easy to obtain as for us. It's a relatively simple process for us, it's easily understood, but one gathers so that it's not a question of trotting down to the mairie and filling in a form. The paperwork has to go to Paris, and there's quite a long delay in obtaining the passport. So that may be one of the reasons why there is a reticence to obtain a passport by French nationals in Normandy. So I think it's my plea, I think, is probably to the Home Affairs Minister to consider how we can move from this thin end of the wedge, which Deputy Barsh is proposing, to a bigger chunk. And I would plead with her to debate with the British government as to how that can be obtained, and to emphasise the economic importance to the island of so doing. And I'm sure she'll be happy to do that. And one of the reasons why I couldn't support Senator Rosa's proposition or amendment to this was purely for the reasons outlined by the Home Affairs Minister, that we are not quite there yet, but I think there is mileage in trying. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Conrad. Deputy Lewis.
Thank you, sir. Before I start, sir, may I raise the depot on Deputy Miller, please?
Yes, the depot is raised on Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I didn't really want to say very much more than others, but I actually wanted to thank Deputy Oza for the speech he's made this morning. He was absolutely passionate yesterday about the need to extend the scheme, and I'd just like to thank him. I'm glad he's come back for his words this morning. So we know politics is about compromise, and I'd like us all to think that what we have in front of us today is a compromise, and it will allow us to move forward in the years ahead as soon as we possibly can to an extended scheme. But I think it's important for us to prove to others outside the island that we can run the scheme, we can run our security and our borders properly, we can administer this, and it is a safe scheme. And I think only by producing some data to show how well we can do that will we be able to extend it in the future. So I wholeheartedly support it. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to support this, and my reasons are as follows. Previous speakers have covered the impact of Brexit, but I think it's especially on my radar because of the recent difficulties with the ferries, of course, and the flights from Blue Island being affected. I'm very concerned about our visitor numbers from the UK being impacted. So this proposition is very timely in that respect. It's hard to know for certain about the visitor numbers because the monthly passenger arrivals data, which can usually be viewed online, hasn't been updated since February. So it's quite hard to actually know what the impact is. And I wonder if any ministers who haven't yet spoken could shed any light on this. Also reflecting on the cost of living crisis and islanders cutting back on spending in our hospitality venues, I agree with previous speakers that this could be something really important for boosting our economy, and I urge members to support the proposition.
Very much. Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. I think it is really important. Deputy Luce spoke about this is a compromise, and compromises mean not always getting exactly what you want. But I do also thank Deputy Oza for bringing yesterday's proposition. It shows, from my perspective, a statement of intent. I think my take on yesterday's vote was that actually, listening to the debate, there are many, many people in this assembly who would like to move to a 72-hour situation. But now is just not the right time. And that isn't because of Jersey, it is because of the UK. As I said yesterday, they are not having a rational conversation about immigration in the UK. But I think there is more to it than that as well. We, as an assembly, have not actually debated our relationship with Europe since Brexit. It's not been a discussion point in here. As a result, there is no sense of anything wanting to change. We, as a government, this Council of Ministers, the previous Council of Ministers, don't have a mandate to change our relationship with the UK in any way, or to risk, let's say, the common travel area with the UK. And that is a big step. Personally, I'm fairly agnostic about the common travel area of the UK. I still maintain a common travel area with 27 countries is better than a common travel area with one country. So that's my personal view. But I do know that to make such a change, or to try to be in two common travel areas, etc., would be something that I think a government needs a mandate for from the public via an election. And that's not something this government or the previous government has. I do think we need to debate Europe in this assembly. We had an awful situation around Brexit and the TCA, where the assembly was, for those of us who were here, will remember, the assembly was basically forced to vote on a package that it hadn't even had time to read, that the UK had negotiated incredibly poorly and left us in the lurch in all sorts of areas. And we, in Jersey, have been trying to pick up the pieces since then. The UK smashed the vase, and we're trying to stick it back together again in a way that we would like it to work for Jersey. So I do think it's important that we, as an assembly, talk about our relationship with Europe. There's a kind of silence, but that silence means we can't make strong decisions about whether it's 72 hours, whether it's anything else. I mean, I know Deputy Joseph and I see eye to eye on most of these matters, but we have no mandate, and we have no mandate even from ourselves through discussion. So I think that's something that as an assembly we probably need to wake up to and just think about what is it that we want. I mean, and just to show the range of views, I spoke to a hotelier recently who said we shouldn't bother marketing to Europe. We should just put all our tourism marketing into the UK and not worry at all about Europe. That was a significant hotelier in the island. So it shows that just because I have a view about stronger relations with France and stronger relations with Europe doesn't mean that they're felt by everybody in Jersey or even in this assembly. So I do think we need to open ourselves up and have those tough conversations. What is it that we would like? Because otherwise we will always be sitting there slightly fearful of antagonising or pushing too far and reaping potential repercussions from the United Kingdom. And if there's something, if I can find a form of a debate, I will try to bring a proposition which can force a debate on Europe in this assembly, because, goodness, we've seen the discussion in the UK. We've had to put up with listening to their misinformed discussions about Europe for years, and yet we've not had one here in Jersey. So I think that is really important. To Deputy Tuddier's point about discriminatory matters, border controls are inherently discriminatory. You require visas from one country but not from another. You don't require passports from the UK, but you do from Europe. You know, border controls discriminate. That's what they do. People from certain countries have certain rights in other countries and don't have rights in other countries. That's the fact of life. If I go to a country, I have to take my passport. They may choose not to let me in just because, if they want, they don't like Jersey. Border officials have an immense amount of power because they, as individuals, can determine who comes into a country and who doesn't. So there is entirely discrimination around it, and I don't think that's something that really affects our discussion of this 72-hour or 24-hour ID card situation. It's just a fact of life that people try to control the movement of people, and as a result, they discriminate. And our border controls discriminate, the UK's do, the EU's do. Yeah, that's just the way it is. But I think so. I do take yesterday's debate and today as a starting point. I do hope, and I do, whether I'm in the Assembly or not, I do hope that the next Home Affairs Minister, whoever that is, will push harder. And if I'm not in the Assembly, I'll be writing lots of letters to annoy them into pushing harder on the ID card situation. If I am in the Assembly, I'll be pushing the Home Affairs Minister to do exactly that, and probably trying to build a consensus, because over 2 or 3 years of good operation of the system that we have, there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't push further on with the 72-hour ID card. And I'm really pleased, sir, that twinning has been mentioned a number of times today. The Constable of Grouville was quite right. There is an age problem with our twinning associations. As I've said, I think in here before, I'm pretty much the youngest in Jersey's and St Lawrence's Twinning Association by some distance, and I'm 50. So we do need to reinvigorate that, because that is one method in which we not only maintain cultural links, but we maintain economic links, because quite rightly, it is through the constant exchange of people between La Manche and Jersey that we maintain the system of Manche-Ile Express. If that dries up, then we lose more connectivity as well. So I do encourage all members here to engage with their parish twinning associations. They're really, really interesting. And please do also engage with your parishioners to encourage them to get involved. This also takes us back to French speaking and learning French, and obviously Deputy Balash's previous propositions about French speaking schools. These are matters that we need to discuss. But I think more than anything, if we are to really want to grasp the nettle in relation to Jersey having its own kind of independent relationship with Europe and France, then we need to discuss that here, and we need to discuss that with people in the island. Otherwise, we risk acting on matters for which we don't have a mandate, but which have significant consequences. And that would be extremely difficult, sir. But, of course, I will be wholeheartedly supporting Deputy Balash's proposition today, and I thank him for bringing it. And I thank the Home Affairs Minister and Deputy Miles, as the former Home Affairs Minister, for enabling this 24-hour situation with the ID cards to take place, because it's hugely valued by our representatives in France. I spoke to some deputies from the National Assembly just 2 weeks ago, and they were very, very pleased that they felt that we were able to say, look, we think we're going to be able to carry on with this ID card situation. That meant a lot to them, because they know it is Jersey being different to the rest of Britain, and Jersey valuing its French links. Thank you, sir.
Well, Deputy Taddy has asked if you give way for a point of clarification.
Of course.
Deputy Taddy?
Thank you, sir. I did want to wait to the end, so thank you to the Minister. There's 2 points of clarification. The first one was when I mentioned discrimination about who can come in, i.e. other EU nationals not being allowed to travel in for a day trip on an ID card. Could the Minister clarify, as my point was about the economic benefit or economic loss to Jersey, whether or not the Minister thinks it would be desirable to extend it to other nationals who might find themselves, for example, in St Malo and available for a day trip? And the second point of clarification was my question around other proactive steps that economic development and Visit Jersey might take to encourage French nationals to get a passport or to use their passport to visit Jersey for a longer period.
I think the first is a legitimate point of clarification. I don't think, Deputy, the second is a legitimate point of clarification. You're simply asking for the Minister to make an additional element to his speech, and I'm not sure that's clarifying anything in particular. But as to the first point, Minister?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your ruling as well, sir. I read it the same way. With regard to EU nationals, it's simple. I'll state it. When anybody's talking to me about access to Europe, our relationship with Europe, whether we should allow all EU nationals into Jersey with ID cards, you're pushing it an open door, as far as I'm concerned. Because yes, I do think we should have access for all EU nationals on ID cards, etc. But we live, as I said in the yesterday's speech, we live in a real world where that is not necessarily possible at this moment in time. But there would be huge value, I have no doubt, in EU nationals, economic value as well as cultural value in EU nationals being able to access Jersey on ID cards. Thank you, sir.
So would the Speaker give way for a point of clarification, please?
It's a matter for you.
Yes, sir, but I fear I'm about to be asked to make another speech.
I wondered if the Minister had included in his speech the information about the monthly visitor figures.
I can clarify that I didn't include that in my speech, sir.
Very well. Conor Harbison, Peter.
Thank you, sir. And I will be supporting this proposition. And I'd just like to speak about our own twinning association. When we first heard that we would lose the ability to use a French ID card would be lost post-Brexit, we checked how many French members of the Twinning Association had passports, and it may be something to do with the age range of the members, but there were only 15% of the French members who had passports, and of course that put the Twinning Association under threat, its continuation. When the mayors visited, two of the mayors from the region visited at Liberation, they spoke to me about the importance of continuing the scheme. And of course, they also spoke about the ability to stay for more than one day, possibly up to 3 days. And like Deputy Morel, I didn't support that, but only from the point that I believed it wasn't the right time. I think that if we can prove through this scheme that we have the ability to manage it, then that will add weight to any arguments that we have for a 72-hour scheme or overnight stays. So hopefully that will come back in the future. But I have to say that the ability to have day trips very much increases the chances of our twinning associations successfully continuing. And really that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and it's good to hear some of the commentary coming out here. It's a shame that Deputy Ward isn't in the room because he likes my analogies of jam today and jam tomorrow. And I think what we need to think about here is timeliness and urgency of this kind of thing. I will be supporting Deputy Balash's proposition 100%, but what I just want to make a point to the Assembly is about timeliness. We're seeing bed numbers falling, we're seeing hotels continually being put on the market and converted into housing. We're in real time, the market in our visitor economy is declining. And so I come back to Deputy Joseph's commentary and this extension of these schemes. Where is our ambition? Why are we not more ambitious and pushing harder? The scheme, I understand, I've just had some data here, which came in April 23. We're now, what are we now, June 25. So that's an awful lot of time to have just checked in that the carte d'identité scheme is being properly run and well managed. So my question is why are we still waiting to extend that and improve on that scheme? Totally agree with the Minister in terms of a debate on Europe. I think it's really, really important. There are 744 million people who apparently live in Europe, who are on our doorstep. That's a massive market that we're just turning our back on, or seem to be turning our back on mostly. We have to find other strings to our economic bow. Our visitor economy is really important. We have to show that we really do back it. We don't want to just simply talk about it. We want to do it, and we want jam today. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Chief Minister.
Very briefly, sir, just to go on a record, whilst I give wholehearted support to the Home Affairs Minister, I think is in a difficult position given the post-Brexit sensitivities, especially around border control. And also align with the External Relations Minister that will work with her as well and with London to try and find a solution. French tourism is vital to our visitor economy, and of course the impact on our cultural links will be impacted further if we don't find a solution to this moving forward. And I hope we can find a solution sooner rather than later. So we are committed to continuing talks with the UK, and I very much hope, in line with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development's ambitions with developing, the tourism, rebuilding the tourism sector from the very difficult start we've had this year, sir. I think, the feeling in the room is the same. We all want the same thing. It's about how we get there. So just for the record, I wanted to say that this government is forward-thinking on that. We want to support the Minister for Home Affairs, who has raised and the previous minister have reached this position for all the right reasons. But I believe there is a way forward, and we're committed to finding it. Thank you.
Very much. Chief Minister, does another member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak. Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Balash to respond.
So I thank all members who have spoken in this debate, and I hope they will forgive me if I do not necessarily deal with every point that has been raised. I also want to thank the Minister of Home Affairs for accepting the proposition, and also her officials in the Immigration Department for the considerable assistance that they gave me in the preparation of this report and proposition. It's not easy for a minister to stand up to considerable opposition to a particular point of view, and I'm grateful to the minister for standing firm and for agreeing to accept this proposition. Naturally, sir, I accept the Assembly's decision yesterday on the proposition of the amendment of Deputy Ozef, that now is not the right time to expand the scheme. But I hope nonetheless that the Minister will keep an open mind on the matter, and indeed, further than that, keep the issue under active review. It is very much in the interests of our community that our economy should be protected in the way that was suggested by Deputy Ozef, and it's also very much in the interests of our relations with our nearest neighbour, as the interventions from the Constable of Grouville and the Constable of St. Peter showed. These things are important and need to be looked at. It is within our power to extend the scheme. And I don't think that the very small risk of adverse repercussions should be overstated. If we are so risk-averse that we are not prepared to contemplate sometimes standing up for ourselves, we will make no progress. I appreciated too the speech of Deputy Morel. He is quite right that our relations with Europe as a whole are important, and we don't talk about them. And I hope that the Minister for External Relations might find some pretext for bringing to the Assembly the issue of our relations with our European neighbours. I thank members for their contributions. I maintain the proposition, and I ask for the appel.
Very much, Deputy. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been adopted. 49 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. You can't have 49. I beg your pardon, 47. I've invented 2 additional states members and 47 votes for. Very well. The final item of public business is differential pay for ministers, scrutiny chairs and committee chairs, B38, lodged by Deputy Reniff. The main responder will be the chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, that the States of Jersey Law 2005 should be amended to allow for differential pay for members, and to request the Privileges and Procedures Committee to bring forward for approval the necessary legislative amendments prior to the end of the political term, and B, to request the Privileges and Procedures Committee to include differential pay for members within the terms of reference of the next remuneration reviewer, such terms to include the possibility of applying different payments for the following roles: 1. Chief Minister, 2. Minister, 3. Assistant Minister, 4. Chair of a Scrutiny Panel, 5. Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee, and 6. Chair of the Public Accounts Committee.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. This is a relatively simple proposition in that it asks us to take an in-principle decision to allow differential pay for members and sets out a process for enacting that decision should the Assembly vote pour. I will come to the arguments for the proposition shortly, but I'd like to offer a few words of explanation to describe exactly what the proposition delivers and what it does not deliver. Members will be aware that under the States of Jersey Law, Article 44, Part 1, all members must be paid the same. That article says no scheme, agreement or other arrangement whatsoever for the remuneration of or the payment of any allowance to elected members out of the consolidated fund shall provide for different elected members to be entitled to receive different amounts of remuneration or allowance. Part A of the proposition asks PPC to bring forward the relevant amendments to the law to delete this clause and allow for differential pay. I didn't bring those amendments to the law myself because I was advised that it is not normal practice for backbenchers to change the law, not least because there may be complications, for example, consequential amendments to laws that a backbencher would not necessarily pick up. And I thank the greffier and the chair of PPC for their consultations that I had. Whilst I think that is unlikely, there are likely to be those kind of complications, I think it is best to stick to good practice. There are 2 points to make about a vote in favour of Part A of the proposition. The first is that our vote today is not irrevocable. It is an in-principle decision that could yet be reversed when PPC bring forward the relevant legislative change. And perhaps the chair of PPC can indicate in the debate when she expects this to be the case. The second point to make is that Part A is actually the real meat of this proposition. It's the key decision because it sets in train a change in the law. It would remove the bar that currently exists against differential pay. It is important to remember that we, or rather a previous assembly, have already handed the power to set our pay to the remuneration reviewer. We do not determine our own remuneration. The law says that whatever the reviewer recommends will be implemented. There is currently only one limitation, and that is the limitation imposed by Article 44, Part 1. Passing Part A of the proposition would begin the process of removing that bar on differential pay, still subject, as I say, to a further debate when the relevant law change is brought back by PPC. And one final point to clarify regarding Part A, I have indicated to members that I will take the proposition in parts, and if Part A is rejected, then Part B, I believe, will automatically fall away, and if it doesn't, I'll seek leave to withdraw it. However, if Part A is passed, then Part B gives further guidance to PPC and the reviewer by specifying the categories that would be recommended for the reviewer to consider. And as I've said, I will take this section of the proposition in parts, so there'll be a vote on each individual category, role. It is important to acknowledge that this part of the proposition is not binding on the reviewer. That is true in both directions, so to speak. So we might vote to include all the categories I've listed in the reviewer's deliberations, but the reviewer still does not have to award them all differential pay. The wording of the proposition makes this clear. It requests the Privileges and Procedures Committee to include differential pay for members within the terms of reference of the next remuneration reviewer, such terms to include the possibility of applying different payments for the following roles. We are voting to include the possibility of applying different payments for these roles. The final decision lies with the reviewer. It is also true that if we vote to exclude a category, that is again only advice to the reviewer. However, passing Part B would mean that when PPC directs the new reviewer to consider differential pay after the next election, their terms of reference will include only those roles that have been voted for. Legally, the reviewer would be entitled to make their own decision, but I have to say that it would be fairly extraordinary for a reviewer to step beyond their own terms of reference. Members will note that the proposition, if enacted, places considerable power in the hands of the remuneration reviewer. So why do that? And I think the answer is for the very good reason that this is the system we already have. And I think it is a good one. I would like to publicly put on record my thanks to the remuneration reviewers. They have done a great service to the island and to us in the Assembly. They have brought a sensible, calm, respectful and thoughtful approach to their remit. Their reasoning has been thoroughly researched and clearly explained. There have been no decisions that have looked like outliers. And the application of that expertise has, perhaps not coincidentally, helped to detoxify the question of our pay. That is something that is good, and that is why I have no problem with allowing the remuneration reviewer to continue to set our pay, even if it also includes differential pay for ministers and other roles. And I should add that the reviewer suggested in a recent report that the matter of variable pay be brought back to the Assembly. So the answer to the question, why bring this now, is because the reviewer asked for us to reconsider the matter. So with that rather lengthy preamble out of the way, let me get on with the arguments for the proposition. There is, I think, one overarching reason why we should allow differential pay for it to be at least considered by the remuneration reviewer. It is about offering appropriate recognition and reward for taking on ministerial or other significant responsibility. In almost all walks of life, additional responsibility leads to greater reward. That is a good principle in itself. It encourages people to do more and recognises their additional contribution financially. But beyond that simple principle, the case rests on making standing for election a more attractive proposition. Some members may be uncomfortable with the idea that there should be a financial incentive to the consideration of whether to stand and whether to seek a ministerial position. I'm afraid we crossed that Rubicon a long time ago when we agreed that members would be paid. Our predecessors made that change wisely to widen the pool of candidates, accepting that not everyone has independent means and that it is legitimate to expect reward for political service. This proposition would take that one step further and in doing so align us with practically every other jurisdiction in the world, including Guernsey, the Isle of Man and many other comparable jurisdictions. As I say, in the world outside politics, people are rewarded for taking on extra responsibility. They have an expectation that if they do well in their job, they will move up through the ranks, earning more money. Then what happens when they consider politics? Maybe they're young, maybe they're mid-career. We're asking to take something on that breaks with their normal and legitimate expectations. It is entirely legitimate to expect that taking on more responsibility will result in financial reward. As we go through our life, certainly in the professions, people expect their earnings to increase. It's true in the private sector, the public sector, trade unions, the third sector, and so on. We have to remember that some members may come into this assembly quite young.
They may want to start a family or buy a house or in other ways progress their lives. Were they to stay outside the assembly, they might have expectations of promotion or other mechanisms to increase their pay. That is how life goes. The nearest equivalent we can offer in politics, and it's not an exact equivalent, but the nearest equivalent we can offer in politics is that ministers and other senior roles should get more pay. And that engages another reason why I think this change is a step forward. It would make our assembly a little bit more like the society we represent. We already accept this goal in other areas. We want the assembly to reflect the gender balance, the ethnic variety, different age groups, and so on that we find in society. We might also consider that it would be wise to reflect the reward structure that is prevalent in society. And I think at this point we have to take a step back here, because this vote is not about us, or at least not principally about us. We all chose to stand knowing the system as it is. We were not deterred. We accepted the present system and needed no further encouragement to stand. But that is not the point. We have to think about other people who did not stand, people who might in the future be considering standing. This is about thinking about those who do not stand, what those who do not stand might want. And I have been told by many of them that standing for election would be more attractive if a more modern reward structure were in place. I don't claim that this change will change the world. It is a modest change. It will not utterly transform the political landscape. I doubt it will lead to a veritable flood of new candidates, but it will make the idea of going into politics more attractive to a wider group of people, and that is a good thing. With regard to Part B, I don't propose to make the case for each individual category in detail, but simply to remind members that the rationale for the proposition was to reward individual responsibility. My personal view is that the case for the Chief Minister and for ministers to receive additional pay is easy to understand and, in my view, the easiest to justify. I think my views were helped formed in this during the COVID times when the then Chief Minister had to take decisions with life and death consequences for islanders. We may have disagreed with some of those decisions, but the fact is they were weighty decisions, very weighty decisions. And it struck me at the time, when I was not involved in politics, as slightly absurd that those decisions did not, that responsibility did not attract any further reward compared to other members. As far as assistant ministers are concerned, I note the comment of the remuneration reviewer, who said that their view was that this would probably only apply, in other words, additional pay would only apply where an assistant minister had delegated legal responsibilities. I happen to agree with that view, but in the end it is a decision for the reviewer if we give that category to them. Perhaps the most controversial or marginal inclusion, if you like, is scrutiny chairs and panel chairs and so on. I have included them because under the UK system, they are also included as get paid more. They are recipients of differential pay. And I think the remuneration reviewer should have the widest possible remit, remembering that they don't have to vote, they don't have to give differential pay to any of the categories that we vote for. So I will therefore be voting for all the categories so as to enable the reviewer to have as wide a remit as possible. However, I understand some members may wish to limit the reviewer's scope, and that is why I'm taking that section of the proposition in parts. So what of the arguments against this proposition? The original argument to put the ban on differential pay in place came from then Senator Sivray, who argued that additional pay for ministers would tempt members to compromise their principles for financial reward. It would encourage potential abuse of power through the exercise of patronage. Members would be tempted to be obedient and servile. to those in a position to offer ministerial position with its accompanying financial reward. So we would be encouraging naked ambition. So I must say, looking back over Jersey's recent political history, there are those who might say such behaviours do not need any financial encouragement. 20 years ago, there were perhaps justifiable fears that the shift to a ministerial system, when tied to increased pay for ministers, would encourage the wrong sort of behaviours. But the ban on ministerial pay has been in place for more than 20 years, so members can judge for themselves whether the lack of ministerial pay has had the desired effect. My own case would be that the existence of questionable behaviours that are motivated by a desire to achieve higher office undoubtedly exist, but they do so independently of any potential financial reward. As evidence, I would respectfully submit that from the performance of Jersey's political system has not been any different in this respect from any other country that does pay ministers more. I struggle to see what noble behaviours have been so conspicuously promoted in Jersey and so lacking in other jurisdictions that are subject to the corrupting influence of ministerial pay. 20 years on, I feel confident in saying that the introduction of ministerial pay is highly unlikely to significantly change the behaviour of members in the lead up to the selection of ministerial positions, all of which are ultimately in the gift of this assembly anyway, rather than handed out by patronage. There's perhaps an argument that introducing higher pay to attract more candidates is in some way an inferred criticism of ministers or office holders in place now, that we don't have high enough quality candidates and only by ministerial pay can we attract better candidates. That's not my argument. My argument is that variable pay will help widen the pool of potential candidates. Those new candidates might be an improvement, they might not. That is not the point. My point is that it is better to have more candidates. We should want to widen the pool of candidates from whichever part of the political spectrum they come. Competition for places is good. And I'm sure anyone standing for election would want to test themselves against a variety of candidates. The more the better. There is an argument against this proposition on the grounds that it will make no difference but cost money at a time when the government is not balancing its books. On the subject of money, it's impossible to say actually how much it will cost because we don't know what the remuneration reviewer would do with their newfound flexibility. But I estimated in my report that it would be no more than £250,000 based on the kind of statements that they have made in the past about this subject. It's not an insignificant sum, but given the potential improvements to the functioning of our democratic system, I think it is a modest investment. So that's one side of the argument, but the other side is the idea that it will make no difference. I beg to differ. I've been contacted by plenty of people who don't want to put their head above the parapet to say it publicly, but who are absolutely clear that the absence of ministerial pay is a disincentive to some people to stand. So in conclusion, I know there will be some public opposition to this, but not perhaps as much as we might think. Certainly, there's not been much opposition expressed when I've posted on social media about this, and I haven't picked up a strong argument against. So it may not be quite as controversial as maybe some members think. The truth is there will never be a right time to bring this proposition. I have brought it because the remuneration reviewer suggested it should be debated and because I believe in the principle. I think the time has come for this simple modernisation, but I look forward very much to hearing members' views.
Is the proposition seconded? For clarity's sake, I should say that I agree that if the Assembly votes against Part A, Part B will automatically fall away.
So may I ask a question about regards to intention with Part B?
Sorry, may you ask a question?
About what will happen with Part B?
Yes.
When it says taken separately, will we be voting on B1, B2,
yes,
B3?
That's what the proposer has indicated. Very well. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I'll start probably with a quote of a well-known quote about power. I think it's a Tony Benn quote. And he talks about the 5 questions about what you ask when you come across anybody in a position of power or influence. You say, 1, what power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how can we get rid of you? All of those questions do have a relevance to what we're debating today, because Deputy Renouf wants, I mean, let's not beat around the bush. He said, of course, he would like the ability of the remuneration advisor to look at these issues. But of course, what he means is that he wants differential pay. Nothing wrong with that. It's a valid political point to make, position to hold. But he's saying in all of those cases that there's then a gradation. So he's listed 6 positions which we should consider giving members in the future more pay for doing. I'll come back to the point of, irrespective of how well they do that job, we're expecting to pay them more just for having been elected to those positions, which I think is problematic. I'll come back to that point. And there are also key positions there which are not included. So, for example, there's no, for being a member of Scrutiny, if you're a hard member of a Scrutiny panel or a Public Accounts Committee member, you don't get paid any more for that. I'll just leave those thoughts with members, especially if you're one of those members potentially in the future who's doing a very proactive vice chair or vice president or role, which actually means that you might be deputising quite a lot for those who've been elected there. So there are lots of intricate questions here which I think need to be addressed, which haven't been addressed, which we would do well to think on in this debate, because I think they're not insurmountable, but I think they do pose problems. And certainly the way that this proposition is worded, I think does have flaws in it. So let's start off with the first point about Deputy Renouf said that in most walks of life, if you take on more responsibility, you get more pay. And he said that certainly happens in the private sector. Well, it doesn't necessarily happen in the private sector. If you're self-employed in any walk of life, you might decide to take on more responsibility, but depending on how well you exercise that responsibility, it won't always result in extra pay. So it may well be that, I don't know, let's say you're a carpenter, an electrician, you may be an entrepreneur or whatever, you may decide to take on more responsibility, more risk, if you like. It's not automatically going to result in a bigger payout, because if you take on more work, take on more responsibility, but you can't ultimately do all that work, you'll find actually that you get less pay in some cases because you're not competent. So we haven't addressed the whole question of competency in government, I think, which is the issue. I'm also looking at a half-empty assembly today, so I don't know if it's just the angle that the camera's at. I don't know if we need to include perhaps attendance performance pay in this, because certainly we're looking at a half-empty assembly. Presumably it can't be half-empty, sir, otherwise we wouldn't be quorate. And I accept the fact that I'm not there in person, sir, but I am here at least online. Can't be with us in person today because of illness. So I think those are the starting points, that the premise that we need to make a comparison between the jobs that we do in this assembly potentially and the jobs that others do. The first thing is we're comparing apples with pears. Also the idea, and this premise has come up time and time again, is that we need to get more people to stand for election. We need to get better quality of candidates. People are not willing to leave high-paid jobs in whatever sector to come and work in this assembly. Well, that's perhaps a conversation to be had, but it's not true, is it? Because there are lots of members in this current assembly who have taken pay cuts. I mean, I just need to look to my own benches and my own party benches, and I could point out, I won't embarrass anybody, and point out people who have taken significant pay cuts and also a lack of job security, a lack of paid holidays, and a lack of an equivalence of pension provisions to do this job because they believe in the whole point of democracy and they believe in the whole ethos of service. So for lots of members, and it's not just these in the past and in the future, pay isn't the primary consideration. the idea is, of course, that we should be able to live sufficiently. But when we're in this assembly, the motivation to take on extra responsibility, I think certainly for me and the colleagues that I know, is because they want to do a job well, they want to see the island well served, and they want the best people in those roles doing what's in the public interest for the island, sir. Question of pay is not at the forefront of our minds, sir. So I think let's come back to the actual positions that are being talked about here. So the positions of Chief Minister, and I think we do have to differentiate these. The argument that potentially in the future Chief Minister should get more remuneration, I think is understandable, because it's the Chief Minister who is subject often to the high-profile votes of no confidence, who has to carry the can. I think when it comes to other positions, it becomes more problematic, because we go back to those 5 questions I asked at the beginning about how do these positions get their power, who delegates them? Well, of course, in the case of ministers, it's the Assembly, but it's the Chief Minister who can hire and fire. In the case of assistant ministers, of course, it's not even the Assembly. A minister, in consultation with the Chief Minister, can decide how many assistant ministers they want. And of course, they're appointed without any direct mandate from the Assembly, let alone the public. So that's problematic, because it leads to the question of patronage. It leads to the questions of bribery, and not in an absolute sense, sir, but the suggestions that if you become an assistant minister and do what I want you to and vote the right way, not only will you get that position of influence and authority, but you'll also get extra pay. I think that becomes very problematic at a time when we're actually trying to minimise conflicts of interests and engender greater trust from the public, not do the opposite. And I think that becomes a serious consideration. I've certainly seen in my 15 years, sir, that there are big differences in the way members are treated, perceived by the public, and also the workload. So I don't mind saying this on public record. I think I've always been a hard-working and diligent, albeit not a perfect states member. But I have to say that the lightest workload that I ever had in my 17 years of being a states member was the time that I was an assistant minister. I'm not saying that I had a very light workload, but some strange things started to happen. What I noticed is that for some reason I started to get less casework. For some people who would previously contact me before maybe wouldn't contact me as much because they thought, okay, he's got a different portfolio. They might have gone to other states members. It didn't dry up completely, of course. I was still doing my surgeries. I found that I didn't have to go to scrutiny meetings anymore. I wasn't allowed to because I wasn't a member of scrutiny. So all of those meetings that I would have been involved with from a scrutiny perspective dried up, but I also didn't have the full ministerial responsibility because it was the minister who was ultimately answering for the department. So I did feel very included as part of that team, but did it merit any more pay? I don't think so, because I was probably doing no more work in real terms than I was as a non-chair of a scrutiny panel. So to say that an assistant minister, or that I should have been paid more simply because I had more responsibility as an assistant minister, when I was arguably doing no more work or possibly less work than as an ordinary states member, would have both been incorrect, and I think would be insulting as a principle. So I think immediately, I think we can discount the idea that assistant ministers, for a whole raft of reasons, should be paid more automatically just because they're assistant ministers. And of course, there are assistant ministers who are effectively full ministers. You know, does an assistant chief minister who turns up to every Council of Ministers meeting, should they automatically get more than, say, a junior minister or a full minister, but of a smaller, less contentious department? A chief minister, assistant chief minister who's bringing through some very contentious issues about, housing and work, for example, who's in the media every day, who's getting a lot of stick online, versus a minister who at any given time is not getting that kind of scrutiny and is perhaps not bringing forward a lot of legislation, perhaps not through their own fault. I think this is where it starts to break down. And I think the question about public service, the fact that we're all equal coming into this assembly, and then it's the Assembly which chooses some of those key positions, which we do because we want to do a good job of them, we or whoever it is in the future. I think that's a really valid principle which we're potentially throwing out today just because we want to fit in with these perceived democratic norms or these false analogies that happen with the private sector, sir. So I would beg for a moment of caution in that. So I also look at the other positions that are included there. So as a chair of a scrutiny panel, I mean, should I get paid more just because I chair a scrutiny panel when I've got some excellent members of my scrutiny panel who are very diligent, who can deputise for me, who I can trust entirely and who bring a lot to the table? Also, as a chair of a scrutiny panel, I've got officers that work with me, and the same can be said for ministers. So actually, I've got access to some great staff that I wouldn't have otherwise. I don't feel that I need extra pay for being the chair of a scrutiny panel. I'm quite happy with the pay of an ordinary states member, and I'm happy to do that job as long as the Assembly wishes me to. And I think that would hopefully be the case for any future potential candidates. So let's get back to the point that's been made, is that the idea is that we need to get more states members, different backgrounds, more candidates come forward for election. When you put yourself forward for election, A, you don't know whether you're going to get elected, and B, if you do get elected, you've no idea what the Assembly is going to ask you to do, if anything. So this idea that you'll get some great business folk who maybe are on, I don't know, an accountant salary or whatever, who will come into the States and then they'll expect to be given these positions of authority. It doesn't happen like that. It depends on what their competence are. It depends on what their politics are. It also depends on what the politics of the rest of the Assembly are and whether they can build that trust and prove the fact that they can do that role. So it isn't automatic. And so this idea that this proposition today is somehow going to increase the contendership, if you like, for the next election doesn't follow. It might, if we said, actually, we're going to increase states members' pay dramatically up to, double it in the next for 2026, so that people know as soon as they're elected that they're going to get a minimum which they can compare to their salaries. But that's not what we're doing. So this doesn't solve any of those problems. It actually creates more precarity because people won't know what they're going to get paid, and they might be leaving a job to actually find, as an ordinary hard-working states member, that they're not getting paid. They're in an assembly which they've got no control over which positions they get, and they on top of that we have differential pay, which I think is potentially really divisive, and it's only going to serve to put more people off from that, sir. I listen to what other members say, sir. I'm not completely against the proposition. I don't think this is the right time to be doing this. I think it's an absolutely terrible look for the Assembly to be saying we want ministers to be paid more. I could certainly finish on the question of competency and what would happen, for example, if a chief minister was willing to protect an incompetent minister who is making error after error. And we can say it's hypothetical, or we can say it's entirely plausible, and that person remains in the job receiving not just full pay, but actually enhanced pay, because they're doing, even though they're doing a terrible job, and ultimately, of course, it will be up to the electorate at the next election whether they get elected or not. But in the meantime, they're receiving enhanced pay, perhaps for incompetent work. Responsibility doesn't always equal competence. And there are lots of people without the title who do lots of hard work in this Assembly. And I think it's important that in the future that they are recognised. And certainly this proposition doesn't seek to do that. It's entirely divisive. And I think it sends out the wrong message at a time where we should be focusing on greater unity and focusing on the good work that states members do, not the pay that they might wish to receive in future, which could end up being eye-watering.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Scott, did you have a point of order?
I had a question about the interpretation, sir.
Whether I've directed that to you.
Thank you. To so that I can understand quite what I'm voting for. So paragraph A refers to differential pay. Differential pay can I interpret that could then mean lots of different types of ways of evaluation? So it could be market value, it could be performance-related pay.
It's simply,
Differential, yeah.
it does not specify that. If the Assembly votes for Part A, then the prohibition on any form of differential pay contained within the States of Jersey law will come to an end. How that applies and how that is interpreted is not within the purview of paragraph A.
Okay, and then, so if the law were amended, then that would be something that the PPC would take forward then? If I'm just thinking what would happen if I only voted for A rather than B, and then trying to understand what B actually does, sir.
Well, if you voted for A, you will be voting for exactly what I hopefully have just indicated, that there will no longer be any presumption against an absence of differential pay, and the remuneration review committee will be free to consider remuneration without that stricture.
Okay, can I assume the details would be within the power of the PPC? Okay, and then B, it says to request the PPC to include differential pay within the terms of reference. Such terms include the possibility of applying different payments for following roles. So if I voted for that, does that restrict the terms of, I mean, it says to include the possibility of applying different payments.
It's not an exclusive list.
Right.
It would be possible for PPC, or indeed unlikely, I suppose, for a remunerating assessor to consider and recommend that there are other roles that are differentially remunerated.
So when we go through the 1, 2, 6, it's more for the purposes of understanding if the Estates Assembly want to exclude certain things.
Yes, I think what a vote for any of 1 to 6 or all of them indicates to PPC what the Assembly's expectations are with regard to those roles. Either they are included within that differential review or they are absent from it. That's the most that can be said of it, I think.
Thank you, sir.
Very well. Deputy IA.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I would like to say that this is a contentious topic. There are many who believe that politicians are paid too much, and equally there are plenty of others who believe they are underpaid. And because of this, many able people will not stand for an assembly position due to having to accept a reduction in their salary. I'm not altogether sure that this proposal will in any way rectify that problem. I hope that all members have taken the opportunity to read the very informative comments paper from PPC. It highlighted the previous occasions on which this topic has been debated. The most recent being P40 2021, which in many aspects, particularly Part B, Roman 7, resembles the current proposition. I do have some sympathy with the suggestion that the Chief Minister should be paid more than other members. If you compare the remuneration of the CEO with that of the Chief Minister, it is quite outrageous. But it must be remembered that the Chief Minister and all other ministers do have a considerable amount of assistance, as it should be, from the Cabinet Office and from their own departments. Then, when it comes to the question of assistant ministers, I do not believe that they should receive differential pay purely because they are appointed by the minister rather than being elected by the Assembly. The proposition seems to be trying to determine who does more work and therefore who should receive more pay for that extra work. One could then argue that the Constable of St Helier has a much more onerous task than the other constables, but they are not mentioned in Part B of the proposal to receive extra pay. It is important, I believe, to state that all members' roles are full-time roles and that each individual member fulfills those roles to the best of their abilities. It is worth noting that our closest neighbour has a differential pay system for their people's deputies, whereby the President of the Policy and Resources Committee the equivalent of our Chief Minister, receives £85,000 per annum, whereas the presidents of the 6 principal committees, plus the other 4 members of the Policy and Resources Committee, receive £65,000 per annum, with the remaining deputies on £48,000. But of course, in Guernsey, they only have 40 deputies compared to our 49. And as such, we should not be supporting an overall increase in expenditure without seeing an equivalent reduction in the number of states members. Especially since in the opening speech of the proposer, he suggested that it may cost £250,000 more for the extra pay without any such reduction in states members. So even though we are determining future members' pay and not our own, I am unable to support this proposition today. Thank you, sir.
Colin St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I stand to speak as Chair of PPC. And in response to the Deputy's question in his opening speech, I'm not sure that it is possible at this point to say when the draft law would come back to the Assembly. If the Deputy's proposition is adopted, PPC will pick up with the Legislative Drafting Office, issuing law drafting instructions, and the work will be accommodated in the legislative programme. And I hope that members may have read the comments prepared by PPC on Deputy Reniff's proposition. The committee has not taken a position. It is ultimately a matter for each individual member and the Assembly to whether to agree to it. In our comments, we have set out what would happen if the proposition were adopted. As Deputy Reniff has said, PPC would come back to the Assembly with draft legislation to amend the States of Jersey law. Article 44 currently prevents the introduction of differential pay, and that provision would need to be removed. Once a law allowed for differential pay in principle, it would then be a matter for the next state's members' remuneration reviewer. After the next elections, PPC will appoint a recruitment panel to identify the next remuneration reviewer. The process for the reviewer's appointment is set out in the law. Once in post, the remuneration reviewer is obliged to consult all members, and particularly the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and to report back to PPC with the determination of the remuneration to be paid to elected members. Under the law, the reviewer's determination takes automatic effect, and the Assembly cannot change it. If Deputy Reniff's proposition were adopted, the next PPC would be able to instruct the new remuneration reviewer to consider differential pay. It would then be a matter for the reviewer whether differential pay was introduced and, if so, what differentiation there should be. Whatever the new reviewer concluded in that area would take automatic effect. I hope this is helpful. And just as Chair of PPC, I'd like to say to Deputy Tedder that we have almost a full Assembly today. So thank you. Thank you.
Deputy Hull.
Thank you, sir. We were all elected to this Assembly. All the roles in this Assembly are equally important. We are all trying our best to serve the parishioners who have elected us. I believe that we should all be paid the same, and I think that what is being suggested is divisive, and I think we should carry on with the status quo. Thank you, sir, and oppose this proposition.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Miles.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I think I want to congratulate Deputy Reniff for actually bringing this topic to the Assembly. It is a difficult thing to do, and it is divisive. And I just wanted to offer a couple of observations based on some of the things members have already said. I think I take a slightly different perspective to this proposition, and I take it out of the realm of hard work. It isn't about hard work for me, it's actually about the size of the role. each of the different roles has a different magnitude. I have been in a ministerial role. Now I'm chair of a scrutiny panel. I'm also a member of a subcommittee for PPC and a member of another panel. But none of that is about the volume of the work. It is about what you, the size of the role. And I'm minded, I was a civil servant for over 30 years, and as part of my civil service work, I was also a Hay evaluator. And I think there might be merit in the PPC considering the role of Hay evaluation in assessing the magnitude of the jobs that are available in this assembly. So Hay job evaluation is internationally used. It's a systematic approach to evaluating and comparing job roles. It's about jobs, not people. And you evaluate different components. So yes, you look at specialised knowledge, you look at managerial know-how, communication, influencing skills, but it also incorporates levels of problem solving that are required by the role. What the thinking challenge is, how is that different from being a minister when you're a minister or chief minister to when you're a backbencher? Levels of independent judgment. But perhaps most importantly, Hay evaluation tries to assess levels of accountability. So the degree to which the role is answerable to outcomes and performance. It assesses your freedom to act and the magnitude of the role and the impact of the decisions on the organisation. Now, I'm not sure that it's being used for political roles, and I can understand how public accountability is very different, but it is used effectively across our public service. And I do wonder whether we should be aligning the roles within the Assembly with some of the roles that are already evaluated using the Hay system for existing public servants, be that administrators, be that managers, be that senior leaders, be that chief officers. What I would say is that ministers and some assistant ministers have statutory responsibilities. They have a lot of weight on their shoulders, whether that's signing off deportation orders or whether that's making decisions about planning appeals. Some of these are very, very serious decisions that have serious impact, and they're not decisions that a backbencher has to make or a member of a scrutiny panel has to make. So I think really, in terms of the difference, we need to look at the difference in role, the level of risk-taking. And even basic things like the level of vetting to which a minister is subject for particular roles does vary from a backbencher. So again, I go back to what Deputy Reniff said at the beginning. This is about asking PPC to do the work. It's about the principle. And I hope the comments that I've made about evaluation might be helpful, but certainly something that we may consider. It may not be appropriate, but at least it injects an element of science into the process rather than this kind of random issue of who works harder. So on that basis, I will be supporting the Deputy's proposition today. Thank you.
Much, Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's a very interesting debate. And I thank the Deputy as well for bringing this debate, because it's not an easy thing to do, given the criticism, unfair criticism that we all take. And I say that about every member of this Assembly. I think some of the things that are said about politics and politicians on this island, regardless of your political hue, are completely unfair and unreasonable, because I think everybody in this Assembly, and I have said this publicly in the press when they interviewed me, everybody is trying to do the best possible job they can, regardless of our differences of opinion, and I support all members in doing so. Very interesting that Deputy Miles brought up Hay evaluations, which are an absolute beast of a process to go through. And I sort of sat here in a little moment of panic thinking about how that would happen and whether the outcomes would actually be politically palatable for our society. And I think that is a question we have to address, sir, because the political palatability of this is a question that has to be in our mind. One thing I would suggest, sir, is we change the word remuneration. because it seems that it's a very difficult word to say because no one can pronounce it. It really makes you stumble when you're trying to do a speech. So I would suggest that PPC change that to perhaps just, I don't know, I looked up synonyms and there are so many, so I'm not going to go through them all. So I come from a position where from day one in my political career here, I stood on a platform to say we need one type of states member in equal size constituencies. And the most important thing that we can do on this island is have a fair voting system. We recently voted to increase inequity in our constituencies. And I think that is a much bigger issue than how much we are paid. I was one of the people who took a pay cut because I was very much further on in my career. I didn't really think that through, if I'm honest. So my wife thought it through, but we won't go into that discussion. I don't think we come into this for that. And I think the quote from Tony Benn is a good one. I've held a number of roles in this assembly, so chair of scrutiny panels, certainly in Central St Helier constituency cases, many cases, and supporting many people from many parts of our society. And I do so, and I found that, if I'm honest, the most challenging part of any role that I've had, because I've constantly felt I can't do enough. And that's been a real challenge. Somebody in this assembly, who I won't say who it was, it might surprise people, said to me some time ago, this job is a constant exercise in controlling guilt about what you can't do well enough. And I think that was very wise words, and it is for all of us. I've also taken on the role of minister, which I'm very proud to do. And I also recognise, as somebody said, the support that we get as ministers. And I could not do the job without the private secretary work and the work of those officers that work around us. I don't have this view of civil servants that there are too many, or they're not doing their jobs, or they're overpaid. I think we need to think very carefully before we start that conversation, because that is the beginning point of the criticism of us in our role in this assembly. What we need are clear politics. I personally believe we need clear party politics so everybody knows where everyone stands on the political spectrum, what they stand for and what they bring to this assembly. That gives clarity to people voting. In terms of differential pay, I would say I think as a chief minister should receive more for the role they take on. I think that makes sense. It is a role which is all-encompassing. But we all know, as Assembly members, our job is not 9 to 5, and it doesn't matter what we do at some time, you will gain criticism. I've had criticism for walking my dog at the wrong time during the day because I've forgotten to take him out in the morning because I started at 7 in the morning with my emails. I've had criticism for being out in the evening. Whatever we do, we cannot win. But we all take on that responsibility equally. I don't know if I can support this, simply because of the time where we are at the moment. I don't like the narrative that we need people who are paid highly to come into the Assembly because they're the only people who have the skills that we need. We need people, if anything, who come from the backgrounds where they aren't paid as much, where they are struggling, where they do understand what the reality of life is in terms of the struggle to get from day to day to week. It doesn't mean those people are not capable, not intelligent, not educated, and not able to represent a section of our community that perhaps isn't represented as well in this Assembly as it should be. I don't think a lot of personal wealth behind somebody in this Assembly makes any difference whatsoever, apart from giving security and perhaps the money here that we're being paid might be pocket money for some. It certainly isn't for me and many people in this Assembly. It goes towards my mortgage. So I have a problem with the level of pay, of course I do, and the value that we're given, and I think we need to have that argument with one another. And I wonder whether just simply differential pay distracts us from that. That's my concern. And this isn't a criticism of the Deputy bringing this. I'm trying to genuinely have a sort of open debate, probably with myself as I'm stood here as much as anything, to say I'm not so sure whether this will be the case. I do worry, and this is the extreme worry, I suppose, in my mind, that if we have when we give power to any individual to appoint, they can hold people, if you like, well, it's not to ransom, but there is an influence there because of the level of pay. Money is like a motorway, and whatever you earn, you fill it up and you spend it. I've discovered in my life, you have less, you spend less, you have more, you spend more. So you do become reliant upon that. I don't think it will make that much of a difference to whether people have a mortgage, because this is such an insecure role. Every 4 years there is total uncertainty as to whether we would be, and none of us should ever assume that we would be here in the future. I think I'd finish by saying I can't vote for the second part because I don't think I should be deciding on who should be included. And I would ask the question as to whether, if we don't vote for Part B, but Part A is voted for, all of those parts of Part B could be included anyway, because it is up to the service itself. So I don't see Part B as something I would want to vote for, because I don't think I should be determining who gets that pay. It's me making a judgment who does the most work and who has the most important role. I can't do that. I think we all have a very important role, and I know all of us would have been through a point at some point where you have to make an incredibly difficult decision, or you have to do something that is incredibly difficult and you can't achieve what you want to achieve. That happens to all of us in our roles, be it constable, deputy, minister, assistant minister, chair of a panel, assistant chair of a panel, whatever. So I can't vote for Part B. As for Part A, at the moment, I will not be voting for it at the moment, but I still have a bit of an open mind, simply because I think there are other things that we need to do first before we enter into this differential pay system. And I don't think the other systems we've got for the way that we appoint are particularly effective at times. So I would doubt that. But I do. Perhaps this debate is more important than we realise, but at this moment in time, I can't support both parts. Thank you, sir.
Constable Mark, you put your light on. Did you put it on for a point of order or a clarification?
I was wondering if I would be allowed to make a speech in my own right, not as chair of PPC.
I'm sorry, no.
Oh, right.
One speech only, and that would not be possible. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. There are elements of this proposition that I could be supportive of, but I have a concern that I have difficulty with supporting it in its current form. I think and I want to apologise to the deputy to some extent, because if I had perhaps had more focus on it, I might have proposed an amendment to make it in a form that I could support. I'm not aware of how many people he'd had discussed this with, but I feel that paragraph B has made an assumption about the PPC preparing terms of reference. And yet when I've heard the chair of the PPC describe the process and the law, which I've now looked at, it seems that control is basically given to the reviewer to make determinations, and then that is what applies. So if we were, and I can see reasons to support differential pay. I totally agree that one does not want divisiveness in this assembly, difficult as it may be to prevent. But I would point out that actually we have examples of differential pay in lots of ways and lots of reasons where you might actually say they're equitable. You might refer to people's life experience. You might say, would it be right that somebody who's only just left school gets paid the same amount as somebody who's been working for many, many years? And I'm saying this totally regardless of ministerial status or roles. And even with the ministers themselves, and I have to apologise if I offend any ministers who are listening to me, but you might well point out that some have more responsibilities, powers that they need to exercise under certain laws than others. So again, would you just say, right, you are a minister, you should get X? There are other things like market value. I mean, it's, I suppose, to some extent related to how long people have been alive and working and doing different things. But if we're talking about this general desire to encourage people to stand, particularly people with a lot of experience who look at our salaries and think, good grief, not for that, thank you, because I can get so much more. Then maybe we should be applying a differential pay that does look at the remuneration that they would get if they continued in their other in their existing jobs or their last job, possibly cap it so we could afford it. But there's a lot to unpack here, and I'm aware that when it comes to having been in a partnership where there's often has been discussions about what's fair to remunerate partners, and that often involves a lockstep where partners get paid more depending how long they've been in a role as partner. I can absolutely appreciate it's very difficult to come up with something that seems equitable in all circumstances. But I do think that the idea of differential pay has got some merit in light of what I've said in terms of perhaps attracting candidates and being aware that perhaps in the general community, one might say, well, that person's not had any work experience whatsoever, that person's had loads. But I also would feel very uncomfortable evaluating that myself. I think that could be something that could be given to a reviewer, but you've got to be very specific about what you want. And from what I can see, the PPC, if I pass this proposition, it wouldn't be a matter of the PPC specifying terms of reference and putting them to the Assembly. It just would not work that way. So that gives me difficulty in changing the state, approving a state change the States of Jersey law just to simply allow differential pay. At that point, it's all in the hands of the reviewer. But I also do appreciate that other jurisdictions do have this acknowledgement, at least, of the different responsibilities of ministers. But I think I've already pointed out that, it'd be one thing if we were just saying, right, Chief Minister, give that Chief Minister a bit extra. But when you start extending this to ministers, notwithstanding their roles, notwithstanding the responsibilities, assistant ministers, I'm not really that bothered, actually, because I found that I've worked whether it's a chair of a scrutiny panel or an assistant minister, I'm working the same way. Many people are working very hard, so not really. I think it gets more and more complex when you start saying, and this person should get more, and that role should get more. Another matter is the actual financing for this. Now, we know that we've got some severe budgetary challenges, and so we don't, and as the bringer of this proposition knows, has already said, we don't know if you gave the reviewer the ability to award different salaries, quite how that would affect the budget of the graph of government generally. And I've started thinking when it comes to all these nice-to-haves, wouldn't it be great if we had propositions that operate a bit like I try to kind of like operate my wardrobe, which is the sort of one in-out thing that, if I'm going to propose that money spent in one area, why don't I also propose that it be taken away from another? And I do have a proposal here, and I think I actually would get the support not only of the community, but of many states members, and that was reduce the number of states members, and then that could actually produce more money to support perhaps differential salaries to the extent that we think that would be equitable. Even so, though, there's more that we'd have to do there because we know we all have got different work to do. I have actually put in a proposition myself that could be a means of reducing the that could actually be used in a way that could help reduce the number of states members. If we revisit the whole constitution of the States Assembly, maybe we could. But the timing isn't, you've got to get your ducks in a row, and we're doing this first. We're not actually saying, right, let's organise ourselves so efficiently, as we're asking government to do, the executive government to do, that we can operate with fewer people, and then we've got the money, and then we can actually start looking at our remuneration, sorry to use the word that Deputy Robert Ward doesn't like much, but to do that differently. So I am sympathetic to this proposition, but I just find myself reluctant to press that pull button for these reasons. And if somebody can offer some counter arguments that might convince me afterwards, I'm very happy to hear them. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Many islanders will feel that, as states members, we are grossly overpaid and grossly underworked. But many of us know the reality is quite different. Words from now Chief Minister Deputy Farnham in 2022, when he asked both candidates for the chair of PPC on the topic of states members' remuneration. A quick search of Hansard found me that one. He goes on to say, however, this is a difficult issue and one we've avoided for too long, and whether our levels of pay are appropriate at attracting or allowing the very best members of society to stand. And as an addendum to that question, did each candidate believe there should be different levels of pay depending on the roles carried out by members? And if this answer was yes, would they undertake to carry out work to review this as a matter of urgency? I know it's not popular, it's never popular when we discuss these issues, but the reality is I think we have to face up to those difficult questions and not back off from making changes to ensure this Assembly can facilitate members from all society. It isn't easy to have this conversation, actually, and we've heard those reasons already. And I think coming straight out of an election with 4 years to look forward to delivery, Deputy Farnham, now Chief Minister, saw that and raised what is a difficult question that I think PPC should deal with and should be open to discussing. And he might like my views on this, which is I can't support much of Part B of this, but the one part I can support is remuneration for the Chief Minister, which I think is the clearest example members have today to think about why a change in the law, in principle, is an appropriate decision to make. Whether or not we support the scope proposed by Deputy Renniff in all parts of Part B is a different matter, but the ability to have that conversation in some ways feels stopped by what is at the moment a fundamental law change that's required. The remuneration reviewer would no doubt like to opine on different options and given a clear steer from this Assembly to think before they act, in the case of the next reviewer, may come back with some very good suggestions. But the lack of any mandate to even think where one would go with that, I think, has stopped seeing some perhaps good solutions come forward. Like Deputy Scott spoke before, I couldn't support one for the assistant ministers, not until at least they are appointed by the Assembly. I could consider ministers, however, I take note that the States of Jersey law still gives the Chief Minister now the power to move ministers under Article 29 and under Article 29A has powers relating to changes to ministerial officers. Anywhere there is pay involved, there is, as we've heard, the risk of the use of that pay as influence, but there are clear things we can do to change that. I would support, regardless of this, that any change to the creation or destruction of a ministerial office to be a proposition by the Chief Minister to the States Assembly. That includes splitting of portfolios or merging of portfolios, or even the transfer of statutory functions. Any of these things will go a long way towards ensuring that the decisions made about who occupies what roles and those that have different remuneration come to the States first, and that is a decision by the Assembly for who should occupy them. I do think there is a journey to go on before we know the final destination here, but what this asks us to do is to open the door and I hope at least members can support Part A and Part B, Roman 1. That to me seems clear. Anybody who disagrees is entitled to, but I think the description given about the weight of responsibility, regardless of the decisions made and whether we agree with them, is one we should take. And I do thank Deputy Renner for, in a year to the election, happy to raise this. And I think, to quote, as I say, Deputy Farnham, it is a difficult issue, but one we've avoided for too long.
Deputy Dublet.
Thank you, sir. I have written 2 speeches on this matter, and one got into the reasons for and against differential pay, and I've actually put that completely aside. And the reason is this, sir. In other debates where an individual member stands to gain financially or not from the outcome of a debate, we're required to declare that as a conflict. And if it is not a conflict that is shared by a large enough number of people, we're required to withdraw from the debate. So I have a slight feeling of being quite uncomfortable having this debate, and I think it's probably shared by other members. And that feeling has led me to decide that actually what I think is we should put this decision in the hands of an independent and conflict-free remuneration reviewer. And so voting for this proposition today, certainly Part A, doesn't necessarily mean that you want to introduce differential pay. It would be subject to the independent evidence-based process, and every member would be consulted at that point. So I actually want to save my thinking, and I would like to be part of that process and to have an input at that stage in a way that is balanced and assessing with evidence. I think previous speakers mentioned, a scientific evidence-based approach to it. That is what I would like to happen. And so I have voted against differential pay for states members in the past. And so I would emphasise again, I am probably going to vote for Part A, but it doesn't mean I necessarily agree with differential pay. So, of course, members who do agree with differential pay, of course, should vote for this. But I think members who don't agree with it should also vote for at least Part A. Because so I recognise that this will have the effect of kickstarting a thorough and robust consultative and evidence-based process that we all have a say in. It takes that conflict out of our hands and it puts it in that independent body that we have decided to introduce to make these kinds of decisions. And that for me is the most kind of selfless and reasonable decision to make in terms of certainly Part A. I've listened to other speeches around the impact of Part B, so I'm yet to decide how to vote on that one, and I would like to listen to the summing up of the proposer to understand the impact if we approved Part A, but not Part B.
Deputy Balash.
So when I was first elected to this legislature, the Assembly was an assembly of amateurs. Nobody was paid anything, and the consequence was that the members were mainly self-employed or retired. Then there came a pressure for change because it was clear that some people were prevented from standing for membership of the states because they could not afford to do it. They needed a salary to live. And at first there was an arrangement whereby members could apply for a subsidy and then eventually a salary for all members was introduced. The Assembly then became professional. Members were paid to do a job. And then the States of Jersey law was passed in 2005, which introduced ministerial government. And some members were given specific responsibilities. Some of those responsibilities are extremely onerous, as other members have said. The responsibilities of the Chief Minister, but also ministers too, are very considerable. In my view, the fact that the Chief Minister is paid the same as me, who has no independent responsibilities whatsoever, is utterly absurd. The remuneration reviewer has given us a cast-iron hint that we ought to have differential pay for different responsibilities undertaken by members. Every professional organisation does it. No other parliament fails to reward responsibility appropriately. So is there some reason for not doing it? If one looks at the comments of the Privileges and Procedures Committee and looks back to the comments of the then Senator Sivray, who introduced what is now Article 44 of the law, the objection was a potential abuse of the power of patronage. But that doesn't really seem to me to hold water, certainly no longer. Appointments to all the offices in question, with the exception of assistant ministers, is made by the states. The states does not hold a power of patronage in when it appoints ministers. It appoints ministers and the assistant ministers and the chief minister on merit. My only reservation about this proposition, sir, is that I wish the proposer had grasped the nettle and moved the abolition of Article 44. If his proposition is adopted, we are condemned to another long debate on exactly the same subject, and we really could have avoided that if we were debating the abolition of Article 44. But notwithstanding that reservation, with some reluctance, I'm going to support Deputy Reniff.
Deputy Tadier, you've indicated you have a question for the attorney. The attorney is not in the Assembly at the moment. We have asked for him to return. He's available online. So what's your question for the Attorney General?
So it's to ask, so I know that the current provision is that all states members have to be paid the same. Is there anything stopping departments paying their ministers in the form of some kind of stipend honorarium, which wouldn't come out of the States Assembly budget and which wouldn't arise from the positions that the ministers hold as states members, but as heads of department, so to speak? Don't know if that's sufficiently clear. So would it be within the gift of departments to effectively pay ministers separately for the separate work that they do as ministers?
Sorry, I mean, so just to clarify the question for the Attorney General, is this a question about the budgetary process, Deputy Tadier? In other words, departments would put in bids for the ability to pay their minister, because those bids would have to be put in by ministers in any event. And I'm just, in terms of clarity for the attorney, I'm just not quite sure of the nature of the question that you are asking, because a department only has a budget when a minister makes a bid for a budget within the overall process, and it forms part of the government budgetary requirements. I'm just asking if there is a question there for the attorney.
Yeah, the question is about the legal basis. So irrespective of this proposition, if nothing were to change, are there vires for a department to pay a minister an additional sum, which could be an expense or an honorarium or a stipend for the work that they do as a minister without need to change the States of Jersey law. So outside of that, is that a mechanism whereby ministers could be paid more?
Mr. Attorney, are you able to assist on this point?
Yes, sir. Well, my immediate reaction to the question is no, there isn't virus, because Article 44 is clear in its terms. As so you've already just described, each year with the budget, the States Assembly approves allocations to ministers under the Public Finances Law. So my immediate reaction to Deputy Teddy's question is no, there is not that ability. I'm happy to check that further and respond if there is any change to my answer, sir, but I don't believe there will be.
Thank you very much, Mr. Attorney. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Please, Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'll aim to be brief. I'm sure every single member of this Assembly is here because they have a desire to contribute to their community, to our community. And I actually think we have a representative Assembly. I think we have a capable Assembly, and I've worked with most members closely. I've seen the level of effort that goes in, and it is a privilege and an honour to serve in this Assembly in whatever a role we end up doing. In relation to the proposition, and I think it's very brave of the Deputy to bring it, because it is always difficult to talk about these things, which is probably why we should leave it out of the hands of the Assembly. But advocates for equal pay argue that all members should be compensated equally for their roles promoting a sense of unity and fairness. And I think there is on quite a lot of times a sense of unity across the Assembly, even though we disagree a lot. We mustn't lose the fact that underneath the debate, behind the decisions, we're all trying to do or deliver the best for the island. That approach can also help eliminate disparities based upon perhaps perceived seniority of members of roles and positions, fostering a much more collaborative environment focused on public service rather than individual financial gain. And I still maintain that none of us are in here for that reason. So while equal pay for all members might promote fairness and a better public ethos, public service ethos, or that could be the perception, the question is, I think, is it essential to weigh these benefits against, as Deputy Miles and other members have said, the complexities of the role responsibilities of the economic implications of the public perception. And people often say to me, occasionally when I'm walking the dog, what hours do you work? And I said, well, when I'm awake, I'm working, and when I'm asleep, I'm sometimes having dreams about it. And I think that goes for probably all of us, because this job really gets under our skins in a good way, and I think that leads to the good work we all do here. I think a balanced approach is a right solution that considers both the equity and potential need for differential compensation, but that is a decision that shouldn't be in our hands. That is a decision for the independent reviewer. So at the moment, I'm likely to support Part A, but will abstain from Part B. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak? If Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. The Deputy Renouf opened by recalling his own journey into office from early unpaid years of ministerial service to currently role, and I speak to myself in saying that my own journey here was unpaid initially. I stood as a frustrated islander, having returned to Jersey, frustrated with what the political situation that I found myself in. my father being Constable of St Saviour, I would have been expected to serve in St Saviour, but I didn't. But I stood in St Helier and got in. And with that, over time, I held increasingly greater responsibility and served the island in various different capacities. I've now stepped into a non-executive role, and I hope members won't mind if I say it is a non-executive role without even the ability to join a scrutiny panel, so something which I don't quite understand, why somebody that has served this assembly for so many years is unable, uninvited to join. I hear the remarks from members of Reform and others. I listened intently to Deputy Tadier's opening comments that all members are equal and thus should be paid the same. He agrees that all states members are equal in their democratic mandate, and he pointed to the obvious fact that not all roles are equal in responsibility. It isn't implying that anybody is better, members better than that. It's about actually a system that reflects the society and which we serve. The issue of, I was in the Assembly when the Senator Sivray brought the equalisation pay into law. And I can hear still in my sometimes confused mind or overworked mind his words about the abuse of power of patronage, fearing that ministers might be used to pay positions to buy loyalty. 20 years on, I would hope that this Assembly and its structures and the checks and balances that are in place with scrutiny, with Public Accounts Committee, Controller and Auditor General, Commissioner of Standards, and the rest of it, that there would be those proper checks and balances that would deal with any patronage appointment that was the real reason why the original proposition was put forward and accepted. Checks and balances are how things work. And I think that it is simply not, I think members must remember, if I may, that the Assembly has been, and its regard, people don't really think about executive and non-executive in the wider public, sir. Many members don't really know that I'm not a minister or whatever. They just know that I'm Deputy Joseph and I'm in the member of the States. I find it incredibly difficult to basically say today that I'm worth the amount of money that I got paid when I was a minister. And all the people that I look at who've moved on in their worlds, in their jobs, compared to having spent nearly 20 years here and then left and then came back, we really need to think about why it is the Opinions and Lifestyle Survey said that this Assembly is held in such low esteem. It is, and there are a number of reasons why. And I'm not going to suggest that any member doesn't do their best, but democracy is about, as those members at the excellent meeting we had last night of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, those members who have been to other places and learn and get experience from other places, they realise that why would you, they see a plurality of members, party political systems, but really, do members ever on their Commonwealth parliamentary trips ever find a place that doesn't reward responsibility with an appropriate level of pay? In our finance industry, I know that that's probably the reason argued by many that we have a salary them and us situation. But if we're going to, and people in the finance industry and people in business are unwelcome members of this Assembly, but are we actually even able to have a situation where people that are in any managerial role, whether in a not-for-profit or a charity, able to come to this assembly and, yes, have no certainty of what job they're going to get, but if they're capable and they have the respect and trust of this assembly, they're going to maybe get into a senior job with a senior amount of responsibility. But they can't live even a near lifestyle to that which they would get in the private sector or charitable sector, not paid sector or whatever, the voluntary sector. The salaries, I'm not here for the money, but I'm lucky. I've been able to, I don't have children, and I was able to serve not having been paid, and I've been able to live on my state's salary after the 3 years where I didn't get anything. I got it. But really, if I look across at other people of my age group and this level of salary that they're getting, it's simply no incentive. And I think that's what Deputy Ranniff is trying to say. And I'm not ashamed to talk about pay. Jersey is a complete outlier in this idea that it's all the same amount of money. In Canada, ministers earn 311,000 Canadian dollars. I haven't got the chance. I've been looking quickly to see if I can find it, and I can't find the exchange rate, but it's a lot of money. Prime Minister Carney, 422,000 Canadian dollars. A backbencher gets about a third of that. But they've got Malta. I can talk to members about every single place that has democracies, and I'm citing democracies that are regarded as the non-corrupt ones, by the way, the ones that have good marks in terms of their international corruption index. This idea that Jersey is going to become corrupted by a system of differentiated pay would suggest that the checks and balances that this assembly ought to have between its separate areas of government, non-executive, executive, and the arm of government that's called, I think, the judiciary, it's just obvious that we need to change. And if members don't realise and really, in their heart of hearts, think that this is a fair system and a system representative, the current remuneration and the fact that it's all one is going to be the kind of package that's going to attract those members of our society who want to serve, and it is about service. You don't get the same amount of pay as in the private sector or whatever. I dare not even suggest what the salaries of people in the legal fraternity are, sir. But they are not exactly the kind of if we've got clever lawyers in private practice, they're hardly likely to come and be a states member, sir. How many lawyers actually have we got in this assembly? How many other people have... Not many. And members may point fingers, but those members who are, it is uncomfortable to say it, they can. But you can't if you are a 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old person. And this idea that single pay is the solution, well, I don't think this assembly is performing very well, sir, these days. And I'm sorry about that. There's some people doing a great job, and I know people are working very hard. But I believe in democracy, and I believe that the right to stand for election should be a reasonable choice and a possible choice. But the level of equal pay without any responsibility increments is just simply wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. And if it is, if it's true that you can have this idea of corruption and patronage, then why does it work in other places? Why does it actually work in... I could see the leader of Reform laughing at me. I will try and avoid it, but it is not right. I don't believe in party politics for Jersey. I believe in a coalition of independents working for the interests of Jersey. At the moment, I'm confused with the current system, where there is a party and in government. I've raised that to you, sir. I'm confused, and I am seriously in my discombobulated situation of not being on one side or the other and unable to advance things that are in my parishioners that voted for me's interests, unable to get any propositions through, there's something wrong. And there's something wrong with the system that is as it is at the moment. And one element of it is the fact that there is this single pay structure which is unfair, discriminatory to people that want to serve but can't, because they can't even begin to expect to have the abilities to look after a family, buy a house, and all the rest of it. We could speak in this debate about the frank truth of the level of pay that we get here, that the Chief Minister gets, the Treasury Minister gets, the External Relations Minister, and the chairs of the Scrutiny panel, compared to an equivalent post that would be evaluated by Deputy Miles. It is vastly different, and I would urge members to support this proposition and think about the fact that we are a democracy and we need a fair system, and with additional responsibility must come, because there is a lot of work being a minister and a chair of a scrutiny panel and all the bits in between, then we need to basically have a pay system that rewards that. Otherwise, I do worry of a continuation of what we have at the moment.
Joseph, will you give way for a point of clarification from Deputy Tadier?
I don't think so, sir. I think I've made my point. I don't think I can add anything else.
So may I raise a point of order then? I think the deputies may have inadvertently misled the Assembly by saying that he's been excluded from joining scrutiny panels.
No, I don't. I mean, that's clearly a matter of the personal view of the deputy. It may be correct, it may be incorrect, but I don't think it's a point of order on which I can possibly rule. Very well. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to speak for long. I would like to thank Deputy Renner for bringing this proposition. I think it's long overdue, and I do support it. I'm slightly motivated to speak by something Deputy Dubley said, which was that she found it uncomfortable having this discussion. Some of that discomfort will be taken away by the fact that we're going to put the question of pay under the proposition into the hands of an independent person to consider. I would also perhaps suggest to the Deputy that one of the reasons why we have a continuing gender pay gap is because women particularly are uncomfortable with going in and asking for a pay rise. However, I would imagine in very many businesses in Jersey, the UK, Europe, America, people will be going into their bosses today or tomorrow or next week to say, I think I should have a pay rise. And I should have a pay rise because I have taken on more work, I have taken on more responsibilities, I'm working lots of extra overtime, and I'm worth the pay rise. And I think that's really what it comes down to, as Deputy Joseph also said here, the question of the worth of the role. And I find it impossible to agree with the argument that ministers who are making very significant decisions are not considered worth a pay rise. I think it's absurd to say that the Chief Minister, who has huge amounts of responsibility, who's constantly in the firing line, is not worth a little bit more than backbenchers. That ministers who are constantly criticised, whatever they do, are not worth a little bit more for taking those very difficult decisions. Ministers do take difficult decisions all the time. They are very challenging, they'll be criticised. Those decisions may hang round their necks for years, if not decades. People will be reminding them of them forever. So I think it is important that we recognise the worth of those roles. And I think, to be honest, if you're a minister and you don't think you're worth it, perhaps you're not doing your job properly.
Sorry, Deputy, is this giving notice that you'd like to speak, or is this... Well, yes, but you aren't next, so I'll just nod and put your name on the list, all right? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. This is my fourth debate on the issue of differential pay in my time as a States member, and I'll be maintaining the position that I've had throughout my entire time in the Assembly, irrespective of what position I've held in it in that moment. Reform Jersey takes a united view on this proposition as well, sir. There is, of course, plenty of logic in what's at the heart of this proposition. It is, of course, perfectly logical to make an argument that in an organisation, those with more responsibility should get more pay. Perfectly logical, you can make a case for that, no problem. And so it's also an objective fact, as the proposer pointed out, and as Deputy Joseph pointed out several times in his speech too, that Jersey is an outlier on this. It is the case in other, even comparable parliaments, that we have a system on this that is different, including just a few miles away in Guernsey. They have a different system on this too. But here, sir, is where I think they miss the point, sir. We are not just an outlier in this area, but we are an outlier on plenty of other areas that much more urgently need to be addressed than this. Sir, we, to our absolute shame, still do not have a voting system that gives islanders an equal say as to who gets elected into this parliament, nor an equal say on who actually ends up in government. And it is bewildering that so many people seem to not cotton on to this basic part of democracy with which we are failing. We are also an outlier in not having party politics, the only sensible mechanism that you can have for going to the ballot box and deciding who is in your government and what package of policies you get to live under for the rest of that electoral term. And those, sir, are much more urgent measures that need to be addressed before we talk about giving people a greater financial reward for doing this job, when there is not a deep enough connection right now between who ends up with those positions, gifted that by the public with a clear democratic mandate. And that is why, sir, this proposition is putting the cart before the horse. And, sir, I think that there are some flawed arguments that are made in support of it, sir. I think that it is utterly flawed to think that providing a graded pay structure where those in certain positions get paid more than others will entice their view, not mine, but higher calibre candidates to come forward for election, sir, it is clearly a nonsense, because when you put your name forward for election, you've got absolutely no idea what the totality of the election result will be and what position you may end up being in. So do we get people putting themselves forward because they're wanting one of the higher paid jobs, and then the maths after the election works out that they can't get that role just because there isn't support for them in the rest of the Assembly for that role, so they end up on a backbench role with the lower salary that they weren't expecting? What do they do then? They've gone into something with their expectations completely unmatched because of that natural consequence of the system. I have to say, sir, as a party leader, I would consider it a red flag if any potential candidate approached us saying, I want to come forward, but only if I get one of the higher paid positions, please. That absolutely would be a strike against them through our selection process. They ought to be coming forward because they want to serve the island in whatever capacity is best for the island, not because of financial considerations. And so I think that it is, I have to say, I haven't enjoyed some of the dialogue on this publicly, because I think that some of it, wanting to structure our system to entice people with business backgrounds to come into the Assembly, I think is actually quite demeaning for those who do working class jobs. I think we need to have a much more representative Assembly, and that part of the dialogue, I think, completely misses that. But the central reason why I will oppose this, and why I've opposed it previously, sir, is actually because of the typo in the argument, in the proposition, sir. It talks about differential pay. That is, of course, a typo, sir. It should say deferential pay, because that is where this will end up, sir. Because in our system, and I say this casting no aspersions against the current Chief Minister or any others, because I've maintained this position previously, sir, and it's one that I don't think would affect me. But you would be giving the Chief Minister the power to threaten a minister who wasn't keen on towing the line with a pay cut. That is the power that you would be giving to them. As it happens, sir, I think the incumbent wouldn't dream of ever wanting to wield that power. I think his integrity is far above that, but that's no safeguard against future ones. It's no safeguard against those, I think, fairly innocent circumstances that might arise from some ministers who are not from a particularly wealthy background and are doing their best to serve their island and are trying to put their skills into a ministerial position for the best of the island. But they might have children they're trying to put through university, which is a very financially difficult thing to do for many families. They might have housing costs that they want to deal with as best as they can to support their family. But they might have political difficulties with something that's going on in government. They may be someone elected as an independent member with an independent manifesto, not the same as the rest of the government, but may find tension sometimes working in a coalition where everybody doesn't have the same view, where they may feel that there is a financial incentive for them to put their principles aside so that they're not risking their position in government. And that is something we should not allow to happen within our system. So a system of equal votes and party politics would be somewhat of a safeguard against that. And Deputy Joseph referred to all of these other jurisdictions that have differential pay, but they all have equal votes and party politics, where it's less likely to be an issue of policy or principle, because when a party or a coalition of parties have a majority, they're just going to replace a minister with someone with exactly the same policies as them anyway. So it would only really be about professional conduct where that might become an issue. So I've been in a position before where I've resigned my position as a minister. It's a very difficult thing to do because you want to serve your island the best. I see another member who's done that before and knows how difficult it is. You want to serve as best as you possibly can, and you want to do what's right. And sometimes that will mean keeping your position and trying your best, but sometimes it means giving it up because things are as such that that's the best thing you can possibly do. I don't think financial pressure should have to be a consideration in that. It should only have to be what is right for the island and what is right to give the island the government that it deserves. So, sir, let's get things the right way round. Let's not vote now to enable, and this is where I think Deputy Doublé gets this absolutely wrong. She said that she wasn't necessarily in favour of differential pay, but if she votes for this proposition, she is guaranteeing that it will happen, because once that floodgates are opened with that law change, it is inevitable. That's also, sir, why the list of positions that there will apparently be separate votes on is spurious, because you need to change the law to enable any one of those, and once the law is changed, because we've handed over the process to the remuneration reviewer, they can automatically go ahead with it anyway without having to come to us to ask permission to extend it to others on that list anyway. So that is the inevitable consequence of voting to scrap Article 44 from the law. So, sir, for those reasons, I think the Assembly, and I know this will fall on deaf ears to some, needs to wake up on this issue and realise that we are operating in a democratically flawed system that doesn't give power to our population to choose their government, choose what policy package they get to live under for the subsequent four years after that. And until we get that right, tinkering around with who gets paid what in this is frankly a debate that I think is misguided, and I don't support it and urge members to vote against the proposition.
Deputy Scott, did you have a point of clarification?
Yes, please. I waited to the end of the speech.
Will you give way? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the Speaker suggested that the island was an outlier in terms of not having party politics. What evidence has he based this on in terms of small jurisdictions that have populations of less than 200,000 people?
So can I have another 15 minutes on this, because this is something I've dedicated my entire political contribution to Jersey into. We are an outlier in not having party politics, but if I could clarify specifically what I said, sir, is I said we were an outlier in not having equal votes and party politics, because there are, of course, some jurisdictions comparable to Jersey that lack one and not the other. Guernsey is a good example, doesn't have party politics, but it does have equal votes, so they're doing better than us on that front, certainly, sir. But we're an outlier because we don't have both, and even in some small jurisdictions, very few of them lack both, but we'll have at least one of those.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Connétable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And reverting to the proposition itself, I congratulate the Deputy for... I congratulate the Deputy for bringing it forward, and I shall be relatively brief, sir. As I see it, and as the proposer made clear, this is simply almost an enabling provision to enable us to go further down the road. I have no problem in... I accept that, certainly that the Chief Minister should be better rewarded. I hesitate to use the word rewarded. It is in recognition of his efforts. I do not for a moment suggest that any member would seek to be a member by virtue of remuneration, but once they are here, each person has different responsibilities. I think that should be properly recognised. So I have no problem in voting in favour of A. B caused me a bit of a more problem in the sense that, again, I appreciate that it's simply to request PPC to include differential pay for members. The list is... It could be said to be incomplete in some senses. I know, for instance, that the chair of the planning committee is not included. I have not sought his opinion on that, but it does occur to me that there might be other positions which are worthy of inclusion. I'm also mindful of the fact that Deputy Renner himself is not a chair of a scrutiny panel, but I'm conscious of the fact that he does chair other sub-panels, etc., which have as important a bearing on state's business as some of the scrutiny panels. I'm also aware that there have been cases, and I'm not saying this standard, in the past where chairs of scrutiny panels have been distracted by other activities, and the vice chair takes on a disproportionate burden. And I am disturbed that doing anything which might upset the harmony as between scrutiny members. So, putting all that together, sir, I will be. I'm inclined to vote for Roman I and Roman II of the B, but not the others, but on the basis that the remuneration reviewer, and apologies for catching the PPC chair's disease on that point, that reviewer will have greater sway in that, and in coming to decisions will discuss and consider and consult with states members at the time, and that is, it is on that basis, and that this is not the final word, that I will be voting for those two small items of B. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tadier, you have a point of order?
I do, sir. I'm sorry to have to go back to it, but the content of Deputy Oza's speech, I believe, is breached Standing Order 104C, which says that the contents of a speech should not impute improper motives directly or by innuendo to any state's member. And I think that what the deputy did, certainly by innuendo, is that he imputed that members of the Scrutiny Select Committee were not allowing him to join scrutiny. I'd like him to clarify that, sir, and for you to rule on that, sir. Not least because it isn't true, but I don't expect you to rule on the veracity of it, but I think that's a clear innuendo, which he's seeking to portray himself as having been excluded for some reason, which I think puts all of SLC into makes an allegation, sir, which is which contravenes that standing order potentially.
I think that I don't consider that to be a point of order. that I should rule on, certainly not within the context of this current debate and the stage that this debate has reached. But in any event, it's clear that Deputy Joseph has expressed a view. It's clear that he feels in a particular way, but for him to clarify that further, it was not a part of the speech which seemed to me to be germane in any sense to the issues before the Assembly at the moment, and therefore clarification, I think, would be unnecessary, and as a result of which I don't rule this as an appropriate point of order on which I should rule.
It's helpful. I will withdraw any suggestion that it was imputing improper motives. It's just a matter of fact.
So I'll circulate an email as well.
That I'm not a fact that I'm not on anything. Why it is the case, I don't know. Why, I don't know. But the fact is, I'm not.
I don't think this particular exchange is in any sense helpful to the business of the Assembly in concluding this matter, whatever the truth or accuracy or inaccuracy or otherwise of what Deputy Joseph has said in terms of how people are behaving is entirely a matter out with the purview of this debate, it seems to me. Very well. Moving back to the parameters, this is the Home Affairs Minister of the current thinking, Deputy Tom Binnow.
So I've had a change of mind. I think I'm losing the will to live.
Right. Very well. Well, we wouldn't want that, Deputy. So, is there any other member?
You might, sir, but other.
Deputy Hegarty, yes.
Thank you, sir. And honestly, I was not going to speak. However, I would like to make a point so that all members know the point I'm going to make. I won't support this because I do not agree with differential pay in relation to the role of states members. Now, a lot of people have made comment about roles and responsibilities and the fact that if you were in an ordinary job, this wouldn't happen. However, that is factually incorrect. Welcome to the world of being a police officer, and I assume the likes of Customs and Immigration and probably some of the other emergency services would be the same. If you are a police officer, a constable, it does not matter which role you are within the organisation. You might be a frontline police officer working 24-hour rotating shifts. You might be a detective constable in the public protection unit, or you may be doing any other of those roles. You all get the same salary. Your salary change. You may, as the years progress, get differential pay for the length of service. However, as a police constable with 4-year service, your role is paid the same. What this means is that any police officer is able to move between roles without worrying about the differential pay that could potentially impact any mortgage that they may have. We have young people in this States Assembly that need to have some idea of what their pay is going to be. Sorry, I'm out of breath, so I had to run up the stairs. And that means it may be difficult for them to get a mortgage. So therefore, I'm a bit uneasy about saying that if you're a minister, you can get this amount of money, but if you're not, you can't, because they don't actually know what their salary is going to be should they stand for election. That goes throughout the police service, but it doesn't only talk about the different roles, it also is about the responsibilities, because there's a number of police officers that take additional responsibilities, surveillance officers, that would be the same for Customs and Immigration. It's also about working shifts or not working shifts, you don't get any more money. And also, whether you take on being a firearms officer or a search team officer, all of those roles are done in addition to the salary that you are getting. And I know it probably sounds a bit of an odd analogy, but it's not necessarily very different for what we're saying here, because some of us have different roles and different responsibilities to others. But our primary role when we got elected was to serve the community, to serve the people that we represent. And I think actually Deputy Howell actually mentioned that. So that's why I'm not in favour of differential pay. And I do believe that, yeah, I do agree that the Chief Minister is actually a role that's quite all-encompassing. But can I just say something else? I actually also think, sir, it's a privilege to be in this assembly. It's a privilege to be the chair of a scrutiny panel. It's a privilege to be a minister. But more importantly, it's also, I would suggest, a very privileged position to be the chief minister. I think that's a real honour. Maybe people don't have the same view, but I do actually think, as the island's representative on a political stage, that's actually quite an honour. So it's not only about financial reward. I think it's more than that, far, far more than that. So for me, I'm not in favour of the differential because of the things I've outlined. However, I don't disagree with what Deputy Miles said in relation to Hay evaluation. I don't necessarily disagree with that, although, as I said, I have my reservations, because I want somebody who stands for election next year to be able to say, this is my salary. If I need a mortgage, I'm going to the bank and I can say, my salary is, I don't know, 57,000. I can't go to the bank and say, well, it might be 85, it might only be 45, because let's not be under an illusion, more pay for some will be less pay for others.
Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. I hesitate to rise, but I see it, I think, in the way that the mover of the proposition explained it at the start. And like Deputy Messick, my voting record on this probably won't have changed in all the times that we've debated it. As we currently sit or stand here, the remuneration reviewer is constrained on how they look at members' pay. And they're constrained in that whatever is proposed has to be the same for every single member. And what the mover is proposing with Article or Part A, and one could argue that Part B is superfluous, but that's he will deal with that in his summing up, no doubt. With Part A, it is asking PPC to come back and remove that tying of the hands of the remuneration reviewer. And that, to me, seems a sensible, straightforward progression, because, as Deputy Doublé says, she can engage, and any member can engage with that process, and it will be independently decided. So we won't need to, as individuals, deal with whether it's right for us as an individual or it's right for that next individual. We will be simply allowing an independent remuneration reviewer to bring forward the proposals that they think are best for members and for Jersey, and therefore the electorate. And therefore, so I think we're making rather heavy weather of it. It seems to me eminently sensible and straightforward to take away this constraint to allow an independent reviewer to consider. And they may come back and they may take the views of members that say it should be absolutely the same. It will give the certainty that the last speaker mentioned, but it will be put into the hands of an independent person for them to decide and recommend. I think that is the only sensible, logical approach to take, and that's why I will be supporting the mover of the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Did you have a point of clarification?
Thank you, sir. If I could just notify the Assembly, I didn't entirely expect we'd be here. There's a funeral I would like to attend, and so I may, unfortunately, have to leave in the next 5 or so minutes. So I just wish to give leave to the Assembly that there is a funeral I'd like to go to.
Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, I close the debate and call upon Deputy Renniff to respond.
Thank you, sir. I was given some advice recently that when you make a speech, you should stand tall, speak clearly, and sit down quickly. And given that we're approaching the lunch break, I shall attempt to do that. I'm not sure whether to thank the Chief Minister for his compliment in calling me brave. As we all know from Yes Minister in politics, that is a metaphor for foolhardy. But so be it. I think I've shot my bolt in that regard. It's been very interesting listening to the debate, and I thank everybody who's contributed. it's been a reasoned debate, and I appreciate that very much. It did call to mind a former colleague of mine who once proposed a TV documentary with the thesis that you could only understand the whole of British history through the lens of the Civil War conflict between Roundheads and Cavaliers. And I thought that actually kind of slightly was something that might resonate. It resonates, I think, in particular in the Channel Islands. But you know, there is, on the one hand, the perhaps this Puritan levelling tendency versus, I don't know if I'd call it flamboyance, but you know, of the Cavalier wanting to allow more expression of individuality and so on. So I think I wouldn't want to push that too far, but it was just a thought that occurred to me as I was listening to the debate. I think in the interest of time, I probably won't go through what everybody has raised, although I did make notes on everybody's contributions. I think one of the points that was raised was, you know, this isn't really the same as being outside the outside world, where people have pay rises and so on, because you don't know whether when you're elected you're going to get this remuneration, this extra remuneration. But I would say that is actually exactly the same as it is in the outside world. You can apply for a promotion, you can want to be promoted, but you don't know whether you will get that. You carry on in your job with the hope that that will happen. Politics is not an exact comparison, as I said in my opening speech, for the world outside, but differential pay would bring it closer to that system. I do want to take issue with the idea that there are more urgent things to consider. I've been in the trenches with Deputy Mesic in terms of arguing for a better voting system. I don't think that the two things are incompatible. I think we can vote for this safely in the knowledge that the two things can be pursued as separate avenues. The question of differential pay marks, in my view, an improvement to the standing of the Assembly and the operation of our political system. As I said, a modest improvement, but nevertheless an improvement. The question of voter reform is something which I will be very happy to join the Reform Party, and I'm sure in supporting again in the future. The question of party politics, I think, being a red herring in that this Assembly cannot mandate party politics. And we saw at the last election what happens when some people went down that route. So I think that's a bit of a red herring. The question about whether or not the Chief Minister can threaten effectively to have a pay cut, to threaten somebody with a pay cut. It's not really the case, because in our system they can indeed get rid of a minister, but they cannot choose the replacement, and that, or at least determine exactly the replacement, and that puts a significant bar, as I think former chief ministers are very well aware, in terms of their ability to exercise that power. And the Deputy Mesic said that, you know, he resigned in a previous situation. I very much doubt that he would have not resigned in order to cling on to ministerial pay. I think the principle is more important. The question about scrutiny, you don't get, Deputy Tadlia raised around scrutiny's members being hardworking and so on. Yeah, I am absolutely clear about this. This is not a proposition about rewarding hard work. Every member of this Assembly works exceptionally hard. It is about recognising responsibility. And the Assembly will have a chance, if they get to Part B, to indicate which roles they think are worthy of that. The question was raised about responsibility not equaling competence, and no, it doesn't. And that is also the case in the outside world. We don't know, but we do have checks and balances in place in politics, as in the rest of the economy and so on, to deal with people who are not performing as they should. They may be imperfect, but that does not invalidate the principle that taking on more responsibility should lead to greater reward. The question of the chair of the planning committee was raised, why I didn't include the chair of the planning committee. I think it was open for amendment, of course, if somebody wanted to bring that in. My view was, I think, it's relatively finely balanced, but you could argue that the chair of the planning committee operates with a committee taking decisions and without taking individual personal responsibility, but I wouldn't want to push that too far. So perhaps I should get to the nub of the point around Part A and Part B. And there's a slight sort of Hobson's choice here. There was a difficult decision to be made about this. I could have just brought Part A. Part B, and indeed I could have brought the law change. I explained in my speech why I didn't bring the law change. I was advised not to. And it does give us the benefit of having a chance to gauge public reaction after the passage of, if Part A is passed, and if there's a savage public reaction against this, then I guess members could reflect on that. I personally, I don't think there will be, but the question about Part A is the principle, and that is indeed the most important part. If we pass Part A, then we set in train the removing of the bar. If we only pass Part A and not Part B, then we leave the independent reviewer a completely free hand. It is entirely up to them what they do with that. They could award differential pay to nobody. That is entirely possible. We only create the possibility. They could award differential pay to different categories, just the Chief Minister, ministers, or whatever. We simply create the possibility. Part B gives the Assembly the chance to give an expression of view to PPC and to the independent reviewer about the views on different categories. It is, if you like, a temperature check for that consultation that would happen. I thought that was worth offering as an extra feature, but if members don't want that part, then they just reject every part of Part B. Very simple. And leave it as just Part A. So I hope that's clarified that the difference between Part A and Part B, and I hope members vote for both parts. And as I say, I will personally vote for all of Part B, all the categories in Part B, in order to create the maximum flexibility for the remuneration reviewer. In terms of the public's view, I do note that there's actually been relatively little comment on this proposition. Comment that there is generally along the lines of, you're all a bunch of charlatans anyway, why should you get more pay? We shouldn't be paid anything at all, that kind of thing. And every assembly is inevitably described as the worst assembly ever. And by which count, by the way, I envy the Constable of St. Helier and other long-time members of the Assembly, because they obviously experienced the halcyon days before we had gone through half a dozen cycles of steadily worsening quality, as expressed by the public. So no, I think actually, behind the small level of opposition that I've seen, I think most of the public would fully understand this. I've been called brave for going for it. I don't think it is that brave, actually. I'm quite prepared to stand up for the principle. I think it's a principle that the public at large will understand. So, in conclusion, it's not about hard work, it's about responsibility and making the Assembly more reflective of society. It's not about us. I know several members have said, I came into this because of my desire to give to society, that pride in doing it, that it's a privilege, and so on. And yes, it is. It's all of those things, and we accepted all of that when we stood for election. We knew we wouldn't, if we became ministers, get any more. But we need to think a little bit wider than that. We need to think about what people outside might think. It's not just about people, for attracting people from business. It's not just about attracting a so-called higher quality. I've avoided using the word higher quality. I've talked about attracting more candidates. It might be people from the world of business. It might be younger people. It might attract more younger people who might think that they can see a logical progression, at least in principle, through this. As I say, it is not likely to change the world, but it is a modest improvement. Voting for Part A will set in chain the change. If any members are concerned too much, then they know they will have a second chance, and I accept Deputy Balash's point that we should actually have been braver. As I say, I took the view that I should follow the normal procedures, but it does at least have the benefit of meaning that members can take a second look when the law change is brought. I urge members to support Part A, vote on Part B according to the way I've suggested, in terms of if you want to give an indication to the remuneration reviewer, then choose the ones you would like most to get pay. If you would rather that the whole issue was simply left to the remuneration reviewer, then please just vote against all of Part B. I think the question is also raised about whether or not this will lead to the consequence of increasing ministerial pay would lead to a reduction in salary for the rest of members. I think that, I mean, the remuneration reviewer has complete freedom. However, the remuneration reviewer has decided what they think the base salary of members should be. They have given very clear reasons for that. And it seems to me that it would be very odd for them to turn around and say, with all those reasons why I think you should be paid the amount you're paid, I now think, actually, you're not deserving of that. I think it's actually less. So I personally think that's an unlikely outcome, but the law gives freedom of manoeuvre, if you like, to the remuneration reviewer. So I hope that's clarified all the issues at stake. I will continue with my kamikaze mission, maintain the proposition, and call for the appel. And you vote on A separately, then B for all individual paragraphs? Yes, please, sir.
Very well. The first vote that the appel is called for, I invite members to return to their seats. The first vote is on Part A of the proposition, and I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part A has been defeated, 17 votes pour, 27 votes contre, 2 abstentions. As a consequence, Part B falls away.
We have all of the votes, please, sir.
Yes.
Those members voting pour the Conotapa, St Helier, St John and St Mary, and deputies Dublé, Gardiner, Gorst, Ozef, Balash, War, Miles, Scott, Renouf, Jearn, Miller, Ferry, Stevenson and Moore. Those members who voted contre, the Conotapa, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, St Clement, Grouville, St Juan and St Saviour, and deputies Southern, Labby, Luce, Lehegra, Ayer, Bob Ward, Mezek, Coles, Ore, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Rose Binet, Howe, Tom Binet, Kovac, Andrews, and Deputy Tadier and Barbara Ward and the Conotapa St Lawrence. And those members who abstained, Deputies Morell and Farnham.
Well, that concludes public business before the Assembly. I ask the Chair of PPC to propose future arrangements.
Thank you, sir. The next sitting is on the 24th of June. There have been no changes to the arrangement of business for the future meetings since the publication of the consolidated order paper. The election legislation is down for the next sitting, and I therefore believe that the Assembly will sit for at least Tuesday and Wednesday of that week. So I make the arrangement of business.
Thank you. Deputy Labby, do you have anything you wish to...
Sorry, no.
That was a comment, Officer Kelly.
So I believe that P45 was lodged yesterday and could be debated at the next sitting. I would request that it could be debated next time, because I think the 8th of July sitting will be very busy. Thank you, sir.
Well, in which case, obviously, that's a proposition that you'll make at the time, if there's a foreshortening of lodging period. Very well. The future business as proposed by the Chair of PPC is agreed. Very well. The Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 on the 24th of June.